My first 5 hours with Mass Effect Andromeda weren't just disappointing, they were flat out terrible. I rarely went 10 minutes without encountering a glitch such as floating enemies or huge frame rate drops. The characters were dull and their dialogue cringe-inducing. My mission log quickly filled up with pointless fetch quests and the user interface seemed designed to fry my brain. 40 hours later I can look back on half-decent loyalty missions with my crew and satisfying combat. Unfortunately the main story never improved, the dialogue remained clunky and performance issues continued to plague the entire experience. Andromeda occasionally threatened to reach the giddy heights of mediocre, however much like the frame rate trying to stay at 30 FPS, it never succeeded for more than fleeting moments. Andromeda received a rough ride in the weeks leading up to release. The game got panned for poor quality facial animations and the 10-hour trial period was enough time for the game to get written off as a disappointing follow-up to the Mass Effect trilogy. I'm not going to judge the game poorly just because of a few dodgy facial animations. That's not what this video is about. Neither am I going to write it off just because it starts slowly. Andromeda's problems go far deeper than poor facial animations and a slow start. It's a buggy mess throughout, the story is boring and any semblance of role-playing has been eradicated. You should avoid Andromeda at all costs. It's not worth your money and it sure as hell isn't worth your time. This video is quite frankly embarrassingly long, and I don't blame you if you don't have time to spend 2.5 hours watching through this video. If you still want my opinion on the game, then I've put a written review up on my website which I'm going to link to down in the description. The website's pretty new, very basic, it's pretty much just a host for this review at the moment. The review is about 2,500 words long I think, which is roughly the length of your typical IGN GameSpot review, maybe a little bit longer. And I give a review score on there as well, so you have to go to the website to check it out if you want the actually fuck it, I gave it 2 out of 5. If you still like reading things, then you can go to the website to check it out. I should get a couple of housekeeping things out of the way early on. As you've probably figured out from the length of the video, the critique is going to be full of spoilers. As with my previous video on Horizon Zero Dawn, I'm going to go through the entire main story together with the meatier side quests. If you want to play this game, God help you, and you don't want to be spoiled, then click away now. I'm moderately sensitive to spoilers myself, so I don't say this lightly, but I honestly don't think this story is one I can spoil. The writers have done that job themselves. There isn't much in the way of cool twists or cool anything really, so this video won't make your experience with Andromeda any worse than it's already going to be. I know it might sound like I'm just saying that so that you stay and watch the video, but if you look at my previous video on Horizon, you'll note that I do strongly recommend you play the game before watching. I can't say that here. The story is shit, and I think I'm doing you a favour by only taking up an hour or so of your time on it as opposed to 45 hours that the game demands. After going through the story, I'm going to take a bit of time to put forward my own ideas. I feel it's important to do this after criticising the game so heavily. Then I'll get into more traditional review territory by discussing graphics, combat and general gameplay. There are hyperlinks in the description if you want to navigate around the video and only listen to certain bits, however I can't guarantee that review sections won't also contain spoilers. In fact I'm fairly sure they do. I do think it's important to give a little bit of context for where I'm coming from and my history with the series. First of all, I wouldn't describe myself as a huge Mass Effect fanboy. I played Mass Effect 2 and 3 but I never went back and played the first one. I really enjoyed those games and I probably would have scored Mass Effect 2 at about a 9 out of 10 and Mass Effect 3 at probably an 8. Maybe. I mean, this was quite a few years ago and my memory is hazy, but I remember liking them. I'm not really that bothered by the ending to Mass Effect 3. I didn't think it was particularly good, but I also didn't have particularly high expectations. Video games that nail their ending are few and far between, and Mass Effect simply gave itself too much to do over a huge trilogy. Second, as I stated, I'm not slating the game just because of the bad animations. There was a lot of backlash to the backlash, if you will, where a lot of people said that Andromeda only got bad reviews because everyone jumped on the bandwagon and rallied against the game. That is obviously nonsense. For one thing, Andromeda actually got decent reviews, far better than it deserved in my opinion, and I can tell you that reviewers have usually made up their minds long before a few GIFs start floating around on Reddit. As I'll demonstrate during this video, there are many bigger problems here than facial animations. Third, as I was editing the video, BioWare confirmed that patches were going to come out to sort some of these problems. The only one that really stands out as a big deal in relation to this critique is the planetary travel time, which you can now skip. Obviously I applaud BioWare for responding to this so quickly, but it really begs the question as to how this ended up in the final product in the first place. Obviously these planetary travel sections were not load screens, so why were they left in there? Someone must have thought this was a good idea, but clearly they were wrong. Finally, this critique does not touch on the multiplayer of the game at all. I appreciate that Mass Effect's multiplayer has its fans, but it's really not for me. To give an informed critique of the multiplayer would require me to dump at least 20 if not 30 hours of playtime into it, and I really don't want to do that. Okay, enough of all the caveats, let's talk about the game, because boy do I have a lot to say on this one. Andromeda is the fourth game in the Mass Effect series. While I haven't played the first game, it looked like an RPG with functional shooting mechanics. Mass Effect 2 continued with the role-playing aspects but added far more enjoyable combat. You could choose whether your version of Shepard was a Paragon or a Renegade, which essentially meant a nice and friendly captain or a strict captain, and your relationship with your teammates directly affected the ending of the game through what were known as loyalty missions. The third game moved away from role-playing aspects slightly. The combat improved, although the difference was nowhere near as big a leap as between 1 and 2, or at least as far as I can tell from videos. And then there was the ending to 3. That didn't go down well, but this video isn't the place to discuss that. From the moment Andromeda was announced, EA promised that this game was a standalone entry and would not follow on from events in the previous trilogy. I can't pretend I'm too surprised by that decision, but I do think it's a huge cop-out. The Mass Effect games are pretty good, but with so much controversy over the ending and the flexibility of the choices that the players could make, any kind of continuation would have upset someone. It wouldn't have been easy to do, and therefore, like I say, I'm not surprised that they've chosen to go a different route. In Andromeda, you play as either Scott or Sarah Ryder. I chose Sarah, so I'll be referring to my Ryder as female throughout. As an aside, I've now probably chosen the wrong sex for both Shepard and Ryder. The general consensus was that FemShep was the stronger of the two in the original trilogy, and I can definitely say that picking female Ryder was the wrong call for Andromeda. You'll see why. And with all that said, it's time to get stuck into the story. I'll take the occasional detour to talk about side quests, but I'll try and power through the story as much as possible. The story of Andromeda starts in the year 2185, between the events of Mass Effect 2 and 3. As we know from the original trilogy, humanity is already spread throughout the Milky Way, but some intrepid explorers have set their sights even further to the Andromeda Galaxy. Now, already I think there's a bit of a problem here because we're not given any reason for them to make this journey. Are we really expected to believe that this ridiculously expensive and complicated trip was done just for shits and giggles? We get a reason later on, assuming we complete a certain side quest, but right now there's no decent motivation for this voyage. Andromeda is the nearest galaxy to the Milky Way, but near in this context still means 2.5 million light years away. Fortunately, humanity, with the help of other races and technology that was discovered during the original trilogy, have developed faster than light technology, which allows them to get to the Andromeda Galaxy in about 630 years. In addition, cryotechnology means that the travellers can be frozen and awoken again on completion of the journey. 4 spaceships known as Arcs make the journey, plus a combined hub known as the Nexus. The Hyperion Arc carries mainly humans, and the other Arcs carry Asari, Turians and Solarians. Krogans also make the trip, however they don't get their own arc. They're mostly on the Nexus, I believe. None of the other species or races from the original trilogy is at all present here. They're just forgotten about largely. The human arc has 20,000 people on board, and I believe the other arcs have similar numbers. I don't believe we're told how many people are on the Nexus. However, given that it's the arcs that are supposed to be transporting people, I expect the Nexus has the bare minimum required to keep the place functioning. Or at least that's what I would have thought, but we'll find out later that's not really the case. The Hyperion Arc was heading for Habitat 7, one of the planets identified as habitable through the long-range telemetry used back in the Milky Way. Sarah Ryder wakes up from cryosleep and barely has time to defrost when the Hyperion hits interference. The ship loses gravity and Scott, Sarah's twin brother, can't be woken up after his cryopod is damaged. Sarah fixes a couple of malfunctions, which is effectively our tutorial on how to use the built-in scanner device on her arm. Sarah then heads to the bridge. She joins the captain and a man known as the Pathfinder as they discuss the damage to the ship and look at what awaits them in Andromeda. There's a weird scattering of energy in the galaxy, which we later find out is called the Scourge. However, that's not the only problem. Habitat 7 is not the paradise the crew were expecting to find. It looks uninhabitable, but they won't know for sure until they get down there. This scene on the bridge tells you a lot about what to expect from the quality of writing in Mass Effect Andromeda. That man on the bridge I referred to as the Pathfinder, he's actually Sarah's dad. So let's just review what's happened. Over 600 years ago in the Milky Way, the crew were cryogenically frozen. The Ark makes its long and dangerous journey to the Andromeda Galaxy. It's not immediately clear whether the Hyperion comes to a stop because it's hit this Scourge substance, or it just does that fairly soon after stopping. Obviously there was enough time to wake Sarah from the pod, but not everyone got woken up. Scott is one of those people who can't be woken up yet because some of the cryopods have been damaged when the ship lost gravity. In those circumstances, and with all that risk involved, don't you think that maybe, just maybe, the father would check that his daughter is okay? He doesn't even look at her when she walks onto the bridge. Now I know what the writers are going for here. They're trying to show that Sarah and her dad have a frosty relationship, and so they figure that having the characters barely acknowledge each other is an easy way to show that to the player. That might make sense in theory, but it's really badly executed. For example, a few minutes later we have this scene.
We're coming through. Anything we should know about?
Seem prudent, given the situation. We'll be down a man with Scott out. I heard what happened. Your brother's strong. He'll make it.
You better. 600-year nap and he oversleeps.
You know him. Never was an early riser. Just don't let it get to you. I need you sharp.
Yes, sir.
Your mom would have been proud of both of you.
In this scene we see that yes, the relationship is a little bit awkward between the father and the daughter, but the father also doesn't come across as a complete tool. However, this is inconsistent with the scene before where he just ignores her when she walks onto the bridge. The Pathfinder team head out to Habitat 7. The Scourge sends their ship off course and Sarah goes flying out of the ship. This scene is dreadfully directed. We experience the fall with Sarah for a few seconds and then it suddenly fades to black. There's a short load screen and then we resume the fall as Sarah crashes into the ground, saved by her suit and jetpacks. I can't for the life of me think why there needed to be a fade to black in there. If it's because the cutscene needs to load, then why even bother giving the player control at all? I mean, for a few seconds it's barely worth it. It's not like we're learning any useful skills in that few short moments where we fall, because that doesn't happen again anywhere else in the game. You land miraculously close to your crewmate Liam and the two of you set out to find the ship. This will be one of the few times you see me travelling with Liam because he's annoying as hell. That handy little scanner on Ryder's wrist can be used to scan objects in the environment. If there's any logic to what you can scan and what you can't, then I don't know what it is. Initially it looks like you're going to be able to scan all the new plants and wildlife you come across, but for most of the game you can't do that. When you scan these materials you get research points which you can then use to research new weapons and armour. I'll talk about that more in detail later. The scanning annoyed me immediately and wasn't a great introduction to the game, but there's plenty to enjoy on this first planet. First, it looks damn good, with electricity slamming down all around you and rocks floating all over the place, giving an impression of a world that is not in a good state. Mobility also feels satisfying. That jetpack helps you get around a touch quicker and the initial platforming feels good. The added verticality should mean that levels don't need to be a combination of thin corridors anymore like they were in previous games. However, that is kind of how this one starts. While looking for their crew, Sarah and Liam meet the Ket. These are the guys we're going to be pumping bullets, lasers and biotic energy into for the next 50 hours. You can immediately tell they're bad guys because they look like leftover concept art from the Protheans in the original series. To be fair to Sarah, she does wait until the Ket shoots at her before we open fire. I'm trying to give credit where it's due, so I want to acknowledge that this is a nice touch. Humans are the aliens in the Andromeda galaxy. We don't belong here, and for all we know at this point, the Ket are the natives and we were invading their home. Of course, once they start shooting, it's probably only fair that we shoot back. Ryder finds a monolith which she believes is the source of the planet's problems, but it's locked up tight with no way inside. You make your way to your crew, defeating plenty of Ket in the process, and eventually you rescue everyone. The Pathfinder, your father remember, pops up and tells everyone to come to his location because he's found a solution to the weather problem. Your dad sets a trap to thin out the numbers of Ket a bit, but there's still plenty of them left to kill. You make your way to a control panel which somehow your dad is able to use while you fend off waves of Ket. The game teaches you how to move your squad mates to tactical positions, but that's all you'll ever be able to do with them. In previous games you could direct them to use certain tactics or abilities, but not anymore. Go here, go there is the extent of the available commands. The Pathfinder is able to open the door thanks to his built-in AI, known as SAM, an abbreviation of Simulated Adaptive Matrix. SAM helps the Pathfinder activate the device inside the vault and almost instantly the weather on the planet changes.
I'll be damned. It's working. We did it.
There's hope at least.
This is more than hope. It's proof we weren't crazy. We can fly to a whole new galaxy and still make sense of things.
Sam had a little something to do with it.
It was simply a matter of...
However, the vault then explodes and Sarah ends up shattering her helmet on the rock as she falls. Her father makes the ultimate sacrifice and gives her his helmet so that she can breathe. He transfers Sam over to her with his last breath, and then he dies off camera. This death scene fell a bit flat for me, and I expect it did for a lot of people. First of all, the second I saw him give her his helmet, I muttered, "Oh, for fuck's sake," under my breath. This sort of thing always bugs me. Share the damn helmet. Let Sarah take some deep breaths and then give it back to Alec. They only need to survive for a few minutes. I'm going to pretend that the air was toxic or something like that, which meant only one of them could survive. The bigger problem with this scene, of course, is the lack of emotional connection to the father. As I mentioned earlier, Sarah and her father don't have a great relationship, and the developers wanted to hammer that home to the player by having them barely communicate and act distant the entire time. It's a bit of a mess really. She refers to him as Sir early on, but then keeps saying Dad when out in the field. It's the opposite of what I'd expect her to do. Anyway, this lack of affection might be consistent with their relationship, but for players it means we don't much care about Alec at all when he dies. Obviously Sarah does love her father, they just don't communicate well. She's going to be gutted by his death. As the player, of course, we just lump him in with the other random guys we've already seen die. I have a lot of problems with this first hour, and I'm going to devote an entire section of this video to my own idea for how the story should have started. For now, I'm just going to say that this doesn't work on many levels. The poor story decisions keep coming when Sarah wakes up to find that she's now the Pathfinder despite Cora being next in line. Pathfinder is a title, it refers to the person who is connected with Sam. Sarah can't remove Sam's connection without dying herself, so she's now responsible for finding a home for humanity. To BioWare's credit, it is made clear that there's nothing inherently special about Sarah. She's not a chosen one or any of that bullshit, she just happened to be the person Alec transferred Sam to on his death. He should have transferred it to Cora, but we later get a weak reason as to why he chose his daughter. It is a bit annoying that everyone you meet in the game seems to already know you because the Pathfinder is infamous and special. I thought this was a bit weird because really it's a Pathfinder team. One person obviously leads the team, but it's the team that's important. It's a bit weird that the title Pathfinder is almost the equivalent of President, for example, on our planet. Before moving on, we get a short scene where the apparent leader of the Ket, a being known as the Archon, tries to emulate what Alec did in opening the vault. He walks off looking fairly displeased with his lack of success. While I think the design of the Ket is about as uninspiring as it's possible to get, I do like the Archon's connected horn or whatever that is. It's a nice touch to distinguish himself from the rest of them. Once the crew is able to get off the planet, they make their way to the Nexus. This huge space station will serve as the equivalent of the Citadel for the rest of the game. The Nexus is also the source of some huge story plot holes and problems with world building. Here's the deal. The Nexus arrived in Andromeda just over a year ago. I'm not sure why it arrived a year earlier than the Arcs. The Nexus is a hub that contains many different races, but not in huge numbers. The Arcs are the main sources of people, with the Hyperion carrying 20,000 humans and presumably the other Arcs carrying a similar number. The Nexus has been floating around in space for 14 months and is running out of rations. They need to settle on a planet soon or they're screwed. That's where the Pathfinder teams come in, of course. It's Ryder's job to go out and find planets that are habitable given that the Scourge has fucked up all their initial plans. That all makes sense, right? Well, no, not really. In the 14 months that the Nexus has been floating around in space, there's been a rebellion, along with the deaths of a few important leaders, including Gian Garson, who is the leader of the entire project. The Krogan were used to help put down the rebellion, however they didn't get the leadership position they were promised and so they ended up leaving the Nexus. The defeated rebels were exiled. You might think that being exiled in these circumstances was basically a death sentence, but as we see later that's not the case. The exiles are now living on a couple of different planets and they're actually doing quite well for themselves. We're supposed to believe that the exiles are somehow jettisoned from the Nexus and able to fend for themselves in this harsh new galaxy. The game tries to simultaneously tell us that the planets are completely uninhabitable without the Pathfinder's help, while also showing us that the planets are actually perfectly fine to live on. There aren't many people on the Nexus, so if the exiles can survive then the Nexus should be able to as well. By the way, there's apparently a book detailing the story of this rebellion on the Nexus, but given the quality of writing in the game there is no way in hell I'm reading that. Really, the Nexus is in the game because the developers thought we needed a hub station like the Citadel. We don't. I rarely visited the Nexus and I only did so when I absolutely had to. The whole thing feels clunky and unnecessary. It's not particularly big either. It's split up into about 4 small sections and you have to use a tram to get from one to the other, which just is another loading screen to deal with. You meet a few people while you're here, but because they're shoved away on the Nexus you won't deal with them all that much. Most of them are bland or annoying, but I have a weak spot for Kesh. Look at this Krogan and imagine how she sounds. Did you imagine it to be like this?
I'm Nakmor Kesh, superintendent of this station. Hope they haven't scared you off already.
She's actually quite a cool character, and it's a shame she couldn't have been part of the team. Everyone else here is either dull or actively annoying. There are plenty of videos with this dialogue in already, but I think it's worth having a listen to it.
Alright, what happened?
To who?
To whom? And your goddamn father. Sorry, my face is tired from dealing with everything. And right now, I just want to know what happened with Alec. Not how he died.
She corrects your grammar and then she excuses that correction by saying that she has a tired face. Who the hell wrote this? Or should that be whom? After this, you meet Director Tan, who is in charge of the Nexus after the 7 people ahead of him died. He gives you your mission. As Pathfinder, you have to go out and make planets viable so that the Nexus can establish an outpost on them, starting with Eos. Eos marks the moment when Andromeda truly starts. Andromeda is an open world game with 5 main planets to explore, together with a couple of others you get to land on briefly. This is when we get to stretch our legs. The shackles are removed and we're free to roam. So with all this newfound freedom, what is the first thing you think you'll do when you arrive on Eos? Get in a vehicle and drive around? Explore the scenery? No. You have to power up some generators that are about 100 feet apart. This then summons the Ket, who pop up immediately for a shootout. Ryder and the team then head to the big ominous looking monoliths that they saw on Habitat 7. We meet an Asari called PB and have to defeat some robotic creatures known as the Remnant who are guarding the monolith. There's a control panel here which can only be activated after scanning some nearby glyphs and solving what is essentially a Sudoku puzzle with weird symbols. It's not easy to think up decent hacking mechanics, but I also know a bad one when I see one. This is not fun and it slows the game to a crawl. The developers know this and nearer the end of the game you're asked to solve them less and less. Eventually you don't even need to bother. If there's one positive thing I'll say about the puzzles, it's that at least the frame rate holds up during these sections. You bump into a Krogan called Drac. He doesn't stick around long in this initial meeting, but then you help him out in a fight later, so he joins the team. Drac is also surviving just fine on this uninhabitable planet, by the way. After activating the monoliths, we're able to enter a vault. This dark underground cavern is full of modern alien tech and remnant to shoot at. There's some basic platforming and what I will generously refer to as puzzles. Essentially you just activate a few consoles. Sometimes you have to do it in a certain order, but that is about as tricky as it gets. This first vault reminded me a bit of the cauldrons in Horizon, except these are even more boring than them. After making your way down a few levels through gravity wells, you can finally activate the vault just like your father did on Habitat 7. And just like that time, the vault bursts forth with some weird fog that Ryder has to outrun before finally shutting the doors behind her.
Should we?
Go!
They find a map that shows vaults on other planets, so yeah, you guessed it, Ryder has to now go to these planets and activate their vaults. Activating the vault almost immediately makes the planet more habitable, however if you're expecting to notice any tangible difference then you'll be sorely disappointed. Now you have to make your first big choice of the game. Well, perhaps big is a bit of an exaggeration. The new outpost you're going to build on this planet can only support a limited number of colonists, so Ryder has to choose between what type of people get awoken from cryosleep back on the Hyperion. Do you want scientists or members of the military in this outpost? You're told that scientists might help develop resources, whereas obviously the military would help with defence. Both your teammates chip in with their opinions. When you're back on the Nexus, there is a protest with angry crew who are pissed off that their relatives, members of the military in my case, weren't awoken from cryo. This decision was made out to be really important, but it's not. You do make further decisions about who to awake from cryopods, but all it does is give you a few additional resources, be it minerals or ammo or a discount on purchasing goods. It certainly never stirs up this level of controversy again. I'll show this a little bit more later. I can't understand why BioWare chose to make such a big deal out of this decision unless it was supposed to play a bigger part in the game. Perhaps there was an idea for a base building metagame at some point. Maybe you'd have to expand the outposts on the planets and defend them from Ket attacks. Perhaps you have to make decisions between having enough scientists but also having enough military personnel to protect the scientists and that kind of thing. If that was the intention, it's certainly not in here. When people talk about Andromeda having a slow start, it's roughly the story up until now that they're talking about. They're right, the game does start slowly. Unfortunately, it doesn't get much better. I'm going to take a slight detour now to talk about the side quests. Not many of them, just a couple to give you an idea of what to expect. The early side quests should be some of the best in the game. If you think about it, most players start off doing a lot of the side quests, if not all of them, but later on in the game they start picking and choosing which ones they want to do. It's fair to say that the first couple of side quests are almost as important as the main story missions when it comes to giving players a feel for the game and trying to get them invested in the world. To be fair, the first couple of side quests do just that. They give you a perfect idea of what you can expect to do for most of the game. In one side quest, you have to scan a load of access panels on the Nexus to find out who is sabotaging the equipment. You run from place to place, pull out your scanner and then move on. You find the culprit, but she pleads her innocence. Eventually you discover the real guilty party and confront him. Now you might be thinking that this sounds a little boring, but harmless enough, right? Well, no, I don't think so. It's even more lazily written than it sounds. Look at this part where Ryder runs past this open security panel. There's no one there, right? A few minutes later, when you've identified the culprit, he's suddenly there at the panel waiting for you. Again, you might think this sounds harmless, but think of what is not happening here. If the culprit was working on the security panel when you walked past earlier, then an alert player might have thought, that looks suspicious, and then confront him of their own accord. The player could have solved the mystery early. It wouldn't have required much rewriting at all, and it would have been a cool little touch to players paying attention to their surroundings. Perhaps you could talk to him and he could fob you off with a lie and then do a runner. Okay, this would require more work, but wouldn't it be worth it to give the player a side quest they can actually engage with? This would encourage players to do more of the side quests instead of dismissing them early on as the waste of time they end up being. At least Bioware is consistent, I guess. Speaking of pointless, a journalist pops up and wants to ask the illustrious Pathfinder a few questions. You're essentially given a 50-50 choice between supporting the establishment or rebelling and giving a controversial reply that might raise a few eyebrows. Now, I'm not a huge fan of 50-50 choices, but at least it's a soft way to influence proceedings, perhaps. Or is it? I don't know, I never noticed any difference in attitudes after answering her questions. Did I say questions plural? I meant questions singular. She only asks you one question at a time because, as I'm sure you know, there is limited bandwidth to transmit messages. Yeah, that's what she says.
But it's good to hear. Bandwidth means I'm transmitting in short bursts, so that's all for now. But you can bet I'll have more questions later. You were great.
I live in California and I have to use Comcast internet, so I can completely believe that in the future we struggle to even send text messages because of bandwidth restrictions. However, it is a little inconsistent with other parts of the story where we're having holographic conversations between planets, so I don't really buy it. After this one question, the side quest then gets put on hold. You'll see the words on hold a lot. It's another great example of what you can expect to see when you stray from the main path. Then there's the murder investigation. You might have already heard of this one. When you first visit the Nexus, there's a good chance you'll bump into a wife mourning the fact that her husband has been found guilty of murder and is about to be exiled. She's upset and asks you to go speak with him. He's only about 20 feet away, mind you. I'm not sure why she isn't with him, but anyway. You speak to the accused and of course he professes his innocence. Rensus was part of the failed attempt to start a colony on Eos. His crew was attacked by Ket, but the security chief, Reynolds, refused to call for an evacuation. There was an argument between Rensus and Reynolds, and suddenly Reynolds is dead. No one else sees what happened due to a convenient sandstorm. While down on Eos, I investigated the crime scene for clues. Well, when I say I investigated the scene, I mean Sam did most of the work. I just pulled out my scanner and pointed it at things. I didn't even have to figure it out. You point the scanner at stuff and Sam tells you the conclusion and what it means. We listen to some audio logs and find out that Rensus didn't kill Reynolds. Reynolds was shot in the back, so it must have been one of the Ket who attacked. However, Rensus did actually try to kill Reynolds, it just so happened that his shot missed. We've got some shades of grey here which suggests that perhaps side quests are not always going to be entirely boring. You go and talk to Director Tan and tell him what you found. Tan wants to go through with exiling Rensus because as he thinks of it, Rensus is guilty because he tried to kill Reynolds. Ryder doesn't like that approach because as she sees it, Rensus isn't technically guilty. Tan leaves the decision up to Ryder because as he sees it, it's her fault for uncovering the truth in the first place. It's a great justice system, right? You get two choices here. You can exile Rensus as planned and let him be convicted of murder, or you can let him go with only some basic community service as punishment for disobeying orders. Now, it seems like an option is missing here, right? Rensus tried to kill someone. You might say he attempted to kill someone. He's not innocent. Anyone who's had an episode of Law & Order on in the background while working from home knows what he's guilty of here. Attempted murder. How the hell is there not a third option to keep him locked up for attempted murder? Again, it's not like this would require a ton of additional writing. Now, full disclosure, I'm a lawyer, so yes, I do know there are some potential double jeopardy issues here. However, I don't think that really plays out. We might be in the future, but this is not a developed legal system. Tan has just casually passed the decision over to you, so I really don't think double jeopardy is going to stop justice being served here. Let's just say they've got a little bit more flexibility on how they serve justice. Plus, even in a developed legal system, if you have the power to commute a sentence entirely, you probably have the power to reduce the sentence to a lower charge. Just one more quick side quest and then we'll move on. While on the Nexus, you get given a quest to investigate broken machinery. You follow a few clues and find out that some sort of animal has been chewing on the wires. It's probably best not to ask too many questions about how an animal got on the Nexus, bearing in mind it's in space, but okay. You follow the trail and you find the animal. However, he's in an office which has other people in it and he's quite big. How the hell did they not see this thing? I've just discussed 4 early side quests that are not only dull to play through, they also offer little in the way of meaningful choice for how to progress. This is exactly what you can expect for the rest of the game and not just in the side quests. As a quick aside, you can see that the quests are split up between priority ops, allies and acquaintances, planets and tasks. Ignore all the tasks, honestly you will thank me later. You can actually also ignore most of the location stuff once you've brought the planet up to 100% viability. The allies and acquaintances missions tend to be a little bit more interesting and some of them lead to the sort of infamous loyalty missions, so you might as well do those ones. Okay, back to the story. The group heads to the next vault, which is on a planet called Aya. However, their ship ends up coming to a grinding halt directly in front of the main Ket ship. I reckon the chances of bumping into another ship like this are so minuscule as to be mathematically impossible. Anyway, the Archon pops up on your screen and has a little chat with Ryder. It's like a one-on-one conversation, but they're both in their own ships, and they kind of could have done this anywhere, but BioWare wanted them to be kind of confrontational, I guess, because it would look more impressive, maybe? I don't know. Anyway, if the Archon wasn't scared of her before, he definitely won't be now.
Just tell me what you want.
I won't explain what you can't understand.
Ryder, I have almost regained control of the ship. I need a few more seconds.
I actually know a lot about the Remnant. We should compare notes.
Enough! Your defiance is naive and reckless. This day marks the beginning of your greatness.
They manage to escape this situation despite being vastly outnumbered, and once the coast is clear, they happen to be right above the planet where the vault is located, even though they must have just gone right past this. Anyway, Aya isn't empty. It's home to a race known as the Angara, which are effectively the first friendly race that we're going to get to meet in the game. Ryder doesn't know exactly where the vault is located, so she goes to ask the locals. The Tempest is allowed to land, but Ryder has to go out by herself. You're escorted very, very slowly through the city to visit the leader of the Angara. The Angara have met humans before, although I'm not entirely sure how. Presumably exiles from the Nexus, which means they must have made it to Aya as well. As you'll see, they've made it to most planets in the galaxy at this point. By the way, why do I have to open this door with my scanner? I mean, wouldn't they open the door for me? This is like being escorted to a friend's house and then picking the lock while they stand by and watch. You ask the leader about the vault on Aya, but she tells you the location is currently unknown. The only person who knows where it is someone called the Moshai. Of course, the Moshai is being kidnapped by the Ket, so you'll have to get her back before you can find the vault. Fortunately, a friendly Angaran called Jarl agrees to join your cause. There's another minor inconsistency here that really bugged me. When landing on Aya, you're told this is a world full of exotic materials. Well, hardly a big surprise. I mean, most of this galaxy is going to be exotic because we haven't been here before. Well, given how new everything was, the second I was allowed to take my scanner out, I started scanning the plants and other materials. Nothing. None of it could be scanned. None of this was considered new information by the scanner. When you're back on the ship, Jarl tells you that the Ket invaded Andromeda 80 years ago and have been kidnapping Angara ever since. An Angaran resistance force has been built up, but it's not having a lot of success. As an aside, I don't really know why they call this a resistance. Really, it's an army. It's the military of the Angara, not really a resistance group. Jarl tells you to accompany him to 2 Angaran planets to earn the trust of the leader. I don't really understand this unnecessary split. You need to save the Moshe. Doing that is surely enough to earn the trust of the Angara. It would make more sense to keep this section linear, have, for example, the crew go to one planet to get the location of the Moshe and then go to the next planet to rescue her. Instead, you're given this weird illusion of choice. You can go and rescue her first, but then afterwards you'll have to continue to earn the trust of the Moshe by going to another planet. It's really a meaningless choice, and it might as well not exist. I went to Haval first to help out some scientists who got trapped in stasis while trying to activate a console inside a remnant monolith. You go there and do your Sudoku magic on the console to free the Angara from stasis. I don't really understand why the Remnant shoot at us on sight but keep the Angara in stasis. There is a potential reason for why the Remnant might not shoot at Angara, but they are shooting at Jarl, so yeah, this doesn't really make any sense. This planet is probably the most beautiful to look at, but there's not much to it. Haval is the planet that felt most alien to me, with its slightly different colour scheme and flying creatures eliminated by a nearby moon. It did feel a little bit No Man's Sky at one point, mind you, but it does look nice. Unfortunately, it's also one of the most frustrating planets to spend any time on. You see, the game has a huge problem with its navigation markers. The map for Haval is small, but it's really painful to navigate. Early on, a map marker popped up telling me to head roughly to the middle of the map. I did just that, and I jumped down into a ravine. It was a big fall, mind you, however you can slow your landing with the jetpack, so it really shouldn't have been an issue. Except the game refuses to let me do this jump. Just before the landing it brought me back up to the surface. Turns out the game forces you to go north first to work your way down into the ravine and then head south to the marker. From there you have to keep going south to reach an access point that gets you to the other side of the map. That's fine, but if it really wants you to take a specific route, it really should give you a little bit more guidance on how to take that route. At one point I wanted to get from the east side of the map back to the base on the west side, however I just couldn't figure out how to do it without fast travel. Games like Witcher 3 and Horizon guide you exactly where you need to go to avoid this kind of pointless frustration. Sure, maybe it's considered hand-holding a little bit, but I'd at least like the option to have it. I can turn it off if I don't want it. In my Horizon review, I actually mentioned how much it drove me crazy when Dragon Age Inquisition wanted you to go somewhere but kept putting unclimbable mountains in your way and wouldn't tell you how to get around them. It never occurred to me that this would still be a problem in Mass Effect Andromeda. It's crazy that this hasn't been fixed. Anyway, rescuing the scientist does grant you some goodwill, but you still need to save the Moshae. Addison from the Nexus pops up via a hologram and you chat briefly about how inspirational the Pathfinder is and blah blah blah. There's a reason I'm mentioning this hologrammatic conversation and you'll see that later. When you leave Haval you can speak to Jarl and get an important quest that requires you to, go straight back down to Haval. This sort of thing happens a lot. You leave a planet and then get told you have to go right back down there. Anyway, Jarl tells you about a second resistance group called the Rokar, or the first resistance group if you want to think of the other one as a military. This group does actually feel like a resistance of sorts, or it feels like a group who would call themselves the resistance, because they're resisting humans and all the other races that have just appeared from the Milky Way as well. It really is weird how everyone knows about the humans, Ansari, Krogans, Solarians, etc. The Nexus only arrived a year ago and it's supposedly been stranded in space. Word sure got around quickly, didn't it? When you go back to Haval, you talk to one of Jarl's contacts and then the quest gets put on hold. This is another thing that happens a lot. For reasons I will never entirely understand, BioWare decided, no, we don't want players getting invested in the stories. Let's put them on hold after any minor development and make them go to another planet later on at some random point in the story. I came down to this planet and endured loading screens for one tiny conversation. Next I went to a planet called Vold to rescue the Moshae. This is the ice planet. If you played platform games in the 90s, then you probably predicted an ice planet was coming at some point, right? Here we work with the Angara resistance to attack a Ket stronghold where they're keeping all the captured Angara. This is where we get our first decent story reveal of the game when we find out that the Ket are turning Angara into more Ket. This obviously leaves Jarl a little conflicted about continuing to kill the Ket, but he doesn't really have much choice. At the end of this level we get a boss fight. This fight wouldn't be particularly difficult if it weren't for one thing that came as a bit of a shock to me. If you get too close to this boss, he will do a one-hit kill. It's kind of insane and it happened to me later on in the game as well, because in effect this boss is just recycled a few more times. Different names and different titles, but effectively there's going to be someone floating around in a bubble like this with an orb spinning around them that you need to shoot. It's about as inventive as the bosses get. Anyway, you need to shoot down the orb to bring down his shield and then shoot him till he's killed. You get another, what I would call a fake choice here. The Moshae, who I assumed to be a pacifist, wants you to destroy this entire place, even if it means killing the Angara who are still here. Jarl wants you to rescue the rest of the Angara, even though that would mean leaving the facility in one piece. This decision does technically have an impact on the game later on, but it's essentially meaningless, and I suspect many players won't even notice. If you go back to Vold after this mission, it's now an open planet for you to explore and make habitable. It's a pretty looking planet I suppose, but there's not a lot to do. Once you reach 40% viability, you can establish an outpost. The weird thing is, you don't have to activate the vault to make the planet viable. Just doing random tasks and killing some more Ket is considered enough. However, aren't the vaults supposed to terraform the planets to make them viable? I mean, what's the point in activating them otherwise? I got an outpost on this level before activating the vault. There's another hologrammatic conversation with Addison and then I headed back to Arya. Arya is now open for you to explore, but there's not much to see. It's mainly a marketplace, although there's also this cool museum dedicated to remnant tech that keeps PB occupied. This marketplace is where I received what is possibly the worst side quest I've ever experienced. You're told that the citizens of Arya have messages for the Nexus, and Ryder has to go to 3 different booths about 50 feet apart to download the messages and forward them onto the Nexus. Yeah, that's it. You go to a booth, you download the message, and then you go to another booth, download another message. It's just really kind of weird. I mean, if you're downloading the messages, why do you have to actually go up to the... Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what the hell is it with email in this galaxy anyway? As I've been mentioning, I've had a couple of hologrammatic conversations with Addison, one on an icy planet and one on Haval, and yet here in the middle of this sophisticated city I can't receive emails without going up to random panels to download them. And another weird thing, I can forward these emails onto the Nexus, however I can't read my own emails until I go up to the Tempest. Anyway, when you're ready you head off to the vault with the Moshai. When Ryder activates the vault, a map of sorts pops up and the Moshai explains that this vault connects to another one in Meridian that appears to be a central hub. I've no idea how they're getting this information from a couple of lines. We have to follow a few more leaps of logic. While they know about Meridian, they don't know where Meridian is, even though when they found the map that led to Arya, they did know where Arya was. Of course, the Archon does know where Meridian is, so that gives us a fantastic opportunity to go and hunt him down instead of actually going straight there ourselves. After a quick conversation with the Angara leader on Arya, you found out that one of the Angara has been working with the Ket and actually might know where the Archon is located. This leads us on to our next location. The Angara traitor is among the exiles on a planet called Kadara. This planet is dreadful. It's a complete mess in every way, and I'd argue that its narrative impact actually breaks the game. Let's start with the performance issues here. Kadara has two parts, a small town of sorts and everything else, which is known as the slums. When you land on the planet, you're automatically dumped into the town, so if you want to explore the planet, then you'll immediately have to go through another loading screen. This is especially annoying considering that when you select the planet in the galaxy selection screen, you're only given one choice as where to land. This is the one planet where there's actually two places you want to go, so why not give us the two choices right up front? This screen where you select the part of the planet that you want to land on, it's completely pointless, but it could have actually been given a purpose in this one instance. It's not. When in the town, some of the doors take a while to open, 3 or 4 times as long as the normal doors. There's no real reason for this. I assume it's hiding loading screens, but it's frustrating as hell. Moving around the planet presents even more problems. There are huge frame rate issues moving around in the Nomad, and occasionally the game freezes for about a second. I found that this always happened in similar narrow areas, so again I think the game is hiding loading zones here. I also experienced a load of frame rate issues when engaged in combat. Now of course this doesn't happen exclusively on Kadara, but it does happen the most consistently here. It's not just the game's performance in this area that bugs me. Kadara is a huge mess narratively. Remember, this is a planet run by exiles, those who tried to overthrow leadership on the Nexus. I don't believe we were ever given the population number of people on the Nexus, but I think it's a few thousand, maybe 10,000 at the high end. The exiles are a small percentage of that number, let's just say 1,000, although again I reckon that's on the generous side. On Kadara you will regularly have to fight these exiles at small camps dotted around. These exiles will respawn if you come back to the area later. So if you add up these exiles that I kill on this planet and the ones you meet just in the course of the game on other planets, I'd say I actually killed more humans than were ever exiled in the first place, or possibly than who even travelled on the Nexus. And that's not the worst bit. Kadara has this toxic liquid on the surface, but otherwise the planet seems perfectly livable. I mean, the exiles are getting on just fine. They've built a society and they've been here for less than a year. Doesn't seem like a very nice society to live in, mind you, but they are surviving. You'll regularly find man-made structures around the planet. There's even a large science lab that looks a hell of a lot like one of the outposts. Kadara feels like a place that's had people living on it for years. And don't forget about all those people up on the Nexus. They're supposedly worried about rations running out when Kadara is clearly a perfectly habitable planet. The exiles have it better than those who exiled them. Being British, I can kind of sympathise with that because we kicked criminals out and sent them to a nice sunny place called Australia, so I kind of get it, but still, this just seems weird. The planet demonstrates the lack of quality control with both performance and world building. It reeks of sloppiness. In one more perfect example of Kadara showing off the overall shitness of the game, you are tasked with tracking down a Ket transponder and then you need to go back to your ship to discuss it with your crew. At this point I was getting used to the game constantly putting missions on hold, so I went and dealt with the monoliths and activated the vault which purified the water. Well, kind of. The water still has the same toxic fumes coming from it even after you've purified it, and the crew referred to it as being dangerous even though it's actually not anymore. It's a shame Kadara is such a mess because one of the best side characters in the game, Reyes, is here and his questline gives you one of the more interesting set of side quests to work through. If you can persevere with the just general lack of quality control on this planet, then I recommend you do his story.
Like it or not, we're here to stay. You can't kill us all.
I can try. Not so fast.
You're late.
I've got a good reason. You'll see in 3,
Don't just stand there!
2...
Kill them!
Still mad?
You talk to Gil on the ship. I don't think I've mentioned Gil yet, and I probably won't mention him again. I think this was the first point I actually realised he was on the ship. Like, he's the least interesting character and he's kind of appropriately hidden away. Gil points you to another planet. So just to be clear, for the main story, all we had to do was fly down to Kadara, talk to a couple of people and grab a Ket signal that was lying around. There was a traitor we were supposed to deal with, but really that just came down to a quick conversation. Again, he just felt like this kind of cheap narrative device to get you to go down to the planet. There's no real reason for this planet to exist other than BioWare wanted there to be an exile base where all the criminals are hanging out. When you follow the transponder coordinates you find a Ket ship, however it's not alone. The Ket ship has captured the missing Solarian Ark. You board the Ark and find out that the Solarian Pathfinder is still alive because she hid under a fake name. The Solarian Pathfinder gets to work on freeing the other Solarians while you kill more Ket and head towards the Archon's office or special room or whatever you want to call it. You also need to take out the guns on the ship because otherwise the Solarian ship is just going to get blown away the second it tries to leave. This is a nice little touch that I'm glad the writers thought of. The Archon captures you and there's some more really painful dialogue.
Some kind of immobilizing field.
It's useless to struggle. I've been in this forsaken cluster for decades, surrounded by amoeba. Then you arrive, a human able to do the unthinkable. You even evaded me. Such an unlikely rival. Was almost invigorating to have one, and yet it's a fitting end.
Is that what sad looks like? I'd give you a hug, but...
Hey, try that with me. A first, son. Your testing begins now. I will learn your secrets soon enough.
Seriously, whenever you put these two together, sometimes I just want to close my eyes and stick my fingers in my ears. The only way to break from the Archon's trap is for Sam to kill Ryder and then resurrect her. I guess this is supposed to feel dramatic, but clearly Ryder's not going to die. Why not do something interesting here? Maybe Sam has to temporarily deactivate himself and that strips Ryder of all her biotic powers for the rest of the mission? Or maybe she wouldn't have her guns on her as soon as she's freed. Anything to make the rest of the mission a little different and more interesting instead of this cheap gimmick that is over before you know it.
Sam!
Stimulating the cardiovascular core. 0 activity. Stimulating the cardiovascular core.
Once free from the trap, we see evidence of the Ket experimenting on Solarians and Krogans. The Ket are certainly a curious bunch. We make it to the Archon's room and find the relic that gives us the coordinates to Meridian. The Archon pops up via a hologram and tells us now that he knows Ryder isn't special. He knows it's her AI, Sam, doing all the work. The Archon seems to be on top of things, so it's awfully convenient that he only showed up after we got the coordinates. He releases a Krogan that has been partially transformed into a Ket and needs killing, much to Drax's dismay.
Explaining it. I've seen what transpired in the laboratory, and now I know what makes you special. Meridian is mine. I've tolerated you long enough. Once your vessels are destroyed, you'll be stranded here.
Captain, fire the EMP! Done.
On the way out, we have a big decision to make. The Solarian Pathfinder needs our help to make it out alive, but Drax wants us to go and free the Krogan scouts that are on the ship and about to be experimented on. Now, this didn't seem like a particularly difficult decision to me. save a Pathfinder or save some scouts who were presumed dead. I chose the Pathfinder. It really did seem like the obvious choice because, saving a Pathfinder in theory will help her save other people. Now, of course, Drac got pissed off with me for this, and I suppose I don't blame him, but, surely once I explain myself he'll come around, right? Well, you never get the chance. Even though it was a 50-50 decision, and I think I had a good reason for saving the Pathfinder, I never got to talk it through with Drac or defend myself at all. He was annoyed, and I started worrying that perhaps now I won't even get the chance to do his loyalty mission later on. Well, it doesn't matter. After a quick rant, this decision never comes up again. It makes a tiny bit of difference to what happens at the end of the game, but that's it. It's basically a cosmetic difference for all intents and purposes. And to be clear, this is the only major decision you are going to make in the game, and it's barely acknowledged. Shortly after this quest, there's a cutscene with the Archon and another Ket called Primus. Here we get final confirmation of just how badly thought out this whole story is, especially from the Ket perspective. Primus seems to be roughly level with the Archon in terms of superiority, like neither of them is bossing the other around, so I think they're about level. Primus scolds the Archon for being so obsessed with Meridian. Their orders were to turn everyone into Ket, this exaltation thing, not study remnant technology. The Archon thinks that Meridian will help them do that quicker. At one point he says that all subjects will either submit to exaltation or be annihilated.
Either the subjects submit to exaltation, or we will use it to annihilate them.
Sounds like typical bad guy stuff, I suppose, but there's a problem. Why do they want to exalt everyone in the Helios cluster? They must have a reason, otherwise why risk so many Ket lives and resources to do it? Now, I've been assuming there's a problem with the Ket race. Maybe they can't reproduce anymore, for example, and therefore exaltation is the only way to continue the species. That's never confirmed though, but let's assume they do have a reason for doing all this. The Archon says that if a species refuses to be exalted, then they will be annihilated. Well, why do that? If you need these people, and I choose to believe they do need them for something, then you're not going to kill them. This makes me think the Ket have zero motivation other than just being bad people who want to cause chaos. Now sure, in the real world you get bad people who just want to cause chaos, but in a game I want to see my antagonists have some sort of real motivation for what they're doing. An antagonist should be the protagonist in their own story. The Archon has not got a story. Anyway, there has to be a reason for this exaltation, and if there is, then you wouldn't just annihilate the people who refuse to do it. The Archon is able to read Ryder's memories and gets the coordinates to Meridian for himself. Maybe that's why he let Ryder get the coordinates so that he could then steal them off her. I'm not too sure, and I'm also not really sure how he's reading her mind, but anyway. So now of course there's this big rush to get to Meridian. Both Ryder and the Archon want to be the first one to get there. That's the theory anyway. Look, I get that open worlds need to let you take your own path occasionally. If I want to break the narrative and go off doing side quests, then yeah, I suppose that's on me. It's my fault. I wouldn't mind the lack of urgency if the game didn't insist on giving me 2 new priority missions that are clearly anything but a priority. You're told to go down to 2 planets, and the second you land, the task is cleared from your log with no fanfare and you can ignore it from now on. The game wants you to go to these planets, but it can't be bothered to come up with a decent narrative reason for you to do so. I went to a planet called Eladon first. This is the planet that the Krogan went to after they left the Nexus. Again, I know I risk being repetitive, but I'll just point out that the Krogan are surviving here just fine. This planet is another dry desert that looks a lot like Eos, further adding to the feeling that this planet is just a complete waste of time. I guess the developers wanted Krogan to have their own base, but couldn't be bothered to integrate it into the story. There are loads more raiders down here as well, by the way, adding to the number of humans you'll kill over the course of the game. There's plenty to do on this planet, more monoliths, a vault, lots of side quests, etc. None of it is essential to the story though, so I'll move on to the next pointless location that we don't really need to visit, but the game tells us to anyway. This is an asteroid called HO47C. I'm just going to refer to it as the asteroid. You can't get out on foot here because the atmosphere is too dangerous. That's okay, mind you, because driving around on your Nomad is actually a lot of fun in this low gravity environment. While here we can go track down outlaws by going to small groups of outlaws and collecting parts of a password until we can access the leader of the outlaws. I'm just going to slide right on past the whole ridiculous situation that parts of passwords are being held in databases. There's a bigger problem. These outlaws are here on this asteroid mining for minerals. These outlaws were also part of a group exiled from the Nexus. That's becoming quite a big group, isn't it? I know I've harped on about this a lot already, but fuck it, I'm going to do it again. The Nexus arrived in Andromeda 14 months ago. In that time there's been a rebellion and the losers were exiled. Since then, these outlaws were somehow able to set up bases on other planets and then make it to an asteroid with the appropriate technology to ensure they could maintain a breathable atmosphere. Or perhaps they just landed here straight from the Nexus and happened to have the right technology on them. Either way, it doesn't make a blind bit of sense. We're actually getting close to the end of the main story, so this is where I start sort of doing the other side quests and loyalty missions, so let's take a look at them now. The first thing I want to discuss isn't technically a loyalty mission, but it feels close enough. Maybe think of it as a loyalty mission for Ryder's dad. So just before he died, Ryder's father transferred Sam to Ryder instead of Cora, who was actually next in line. This was supposedly because he wanted Ryder to get access to certain memories from his past. However, he also encrypted these memories because, well, who the hell knows. Ryder needs to find memory triggers to open up more memories and to get encryption codes for files. I think the logic behind hiding the memories was to stop Ryder getting them too soon, whatever that means, but I'm not sure. A lot of things popped into my mind when I first realised this was going to be a mission. We might have to solve clues to find the memory triggers, or maybe look in some of Alec's favourite books, or look at clips of his favourite movies or his favourite songs or something like that. Or maybe the triggers could be related to experience. As Ryder becomes more accomplished, more memories open up. Or maybe Alec's friends like Addison reveal tiny tidbits of information through conversations as we talk to them, and yeah, none of that happens. The memory triggers are scattered randomly throughout the planets you visit, planets that Alec himself never visited, remember, or had even heard of, and you simply go to a point on the map to find them. For every 3 you find, you unlock a new memory. This is such a grand display of wasted potential that it actually pisses me off. I don't like that I feel this way because some of these unlocked memories are actually quite touching, I just didn't like how I had to get them. The first memory shows you the moment that Alec first learns his wife Ellen has a terminal disease. We also see that he wants to develop AI even though it's prohibited in the Milky Way. The encrypted logs are an awesome touch for anyone who's played the previous games because there's a couple of cameos from people we know in there. The memories are the main reveal though. The next one shows Alec refusing to accept that his wife is dying, and we also see an early version of Sam. There are some touching scenes with the Ryder twins as they say goodbye to their mum, and then the really good stuff gets revealed. Alec has been in touch with a person known as the Benefactor. The Benefactor encouraged Alec to work on Andromeda initiative to give humanity a chance to survive. He mentions the Reapers and all the shit that we know went down at the end of the original trilogy. Combine this with a couple more encrypted logs and Ryder basically finds out that every living species in the Milky Way probably got wiped out after they all left. Now depending on your ending to Mass Effect 3 that quite possibly didn't happen, but that's what she thinks. It's huge news. So what do you think she's going to do with that information? If you still think that Mass Effect is in any way an RPG, then you might think this information opens up a whole new load of conversation options with your crew. I mean, sure, there's not much you can do about it, you're 2.5 million light years away, but you know, they deserve to know what happened to their species. Of course, Mass Effect is not an RPG anymore. You can't do jack shit with this information, you just keep it to yourself. So as far as you know, billions of people have been wiped out and Andromeda is the only chance to maintain the human race, not to mention the Ansari race, Krogan, Solarian, Turian, etc. But you don't do or say a single thing. That's the sort of game we're dealing with here. While on this topic, let's talk about this Benefactor person briefly. Who is he or she? The most obvious answer is the elusive man from the trilogy, or perhaps a close relative like his son. That would certainly be in keeping with the topic at hand, so we know the elusive man had the money to do this kind of thing and he knew about the Reaper threat. However, if that's the case, then why not just show the elusive man to the player? I mean, there's no point in waiting until a sequel for this big reveal. I mean, that wouldn't be dramatic for series veterans and it wouldn't mean anything for those starting the game series at Andromeda. Frankly, we're 600 years into the future now, so there's not much point in it being the elusive man. I suppose he could have cloned himself. He did bring Shepard back to life, so I wouldn't put it past him. Anyway, narratively, I don't think it makes much sense. Whoever the Benefactor is, I'm pretty sure they're still alive and they're likely in the Andromeda galaxy. Jian Garson was the leader of the Andromeda initiative and she was murdered to cover up a conspiracy related to the Benefactor. I don't see any obvious culprits right now. It would be quite funny if it was actually someone like Director Tan. Maybe it turns out that he's nowhere near as useless and that's all just a front. A kind of Kaiser Soze reveal maybe. It certainly could be a big moment to reveal, but you have to forgive me if I'm not all that optimistic about BioWare's ability to nail a big story moment. Ryder gets one more piece of information from these memories. Her mum is still alive.
Sam,
Yes, Pathfinder?
track down my kids. Tell them their old man needs to talk. It's urgent. And how is Ellen?
She remains in stasis. As you hoped, it has suspended the progress of her disease.
Make sure her pod is on the Hyperion. Don't use her real name. I'll tell the kids when the time is right. Hey, Sam. Transfer Pathfinder access. Encrypt memories. There's still hope for your mother.
Alec had her placed into cryosleep with the plan being to wake her once there was a cure for her disease. Scott is awake now, so Sarah goes to deliver the good news to him. The Ryder twins are pleased, I suppose, although you can barely tell from their dialogue and animations. I suspect most people saw this reveal coming a mile off, or at least something similar. I thought it might be more along the lines of her spirit or soul or whatever you want to call it being maintained in the AI, but this works too. In fact, it's actually better than that. I don't mind her being in cryosleep, it makes sense, but I don't understand why the hell Alec kept these memories from Ryder for an indiscriminate amount of time. I'm going to go into more detail on this later, but Ryder has actually been activating cryopods as we play the game. It's a bit risky having her mum in one of these cryopods without her realising, because she could open up Ellen's cryopod and Ellen would then die because the disease hasn't been cured. Ryder's dad really needed to tell Ryder this information to stop her making this mistake. Like I said, I really liked this side quest, but the game doesn't take it seriously. There's a line of dialogue later on which shows just how little attention to detail has been paid here. I heard this line after Sarah and Scott found out that their mum is still alive.
Well, imagine if it was Scott.
I don't know what I'd do. We're all that's left of our family.
Same here.
Okay, let's get stuck into these loyalty missions now. First of all, I'm going to point out that every single one of these quest lines has the huge problem of being put on hold at random times, and they require you to go down to planets for 30-second conversations before going back up to the ship and then moving to another planet for another 30-second conversation and ad infinitum. It's absolutely tiresome and drags the quests out through a number of unnecessary loading screens. I'm pretty sure it's just done to pad out the gameplay time, to be honest, which is kind of ridiculous. I do encourage you to look past this if you can though, for the loyalty missions especially, because they're actually the best part of Andromeda. If you can't enjoy these missions, then you're not going to enjoy anything in it. With each of these, I'm going to just gloss over a lot of the pointless travel and the preamble for the sake of finishing this video in 2017. So let's start with PB. I expect she's a polarising character among players. You're either going to think she's fun or incredibly annoying. I expected to find her annoying, and I do kind of a little bit, but she does at least have a clear personality. That can't be said for all your crewmates. I like taking PB along on missions because she peppers your teammates with inappropriate questions, and you find out things about how Jarl has to moisten his flaps. Sure, it gets repetitive after a while, but it's better than nothing. PB is obsessed with this remnant technology, so you help her gather enough until she can build a friendly assistant called Pock. Pock is stolen by an ex-lover of PB's called Kalinda. You go and rescue Pock, but there's another piece of remnant tech that PB wants to get her hands on afterwards. PB doesn't give you much choice in the matter. She jettisons her escape pod with you in it, and you crash land in the middle of a volcano. Now I know PB has been established as being reckless and obsessed with this remnant tech, but this kind of takes things to another level. I mean, she's clearly putting the life of the Pathfinder at risk here and jeopardising the entire galaxy, and I know it's supposed to be a fun mission, but I think I'd rather they ended up on the volcano by accident or something a little bit less deliberate happened, because PB looks really selfish here. Kalinda is here on this volcano as well, so you both race to be the first to get to the technology. At the end, Kalinda needs saving, and much to my surprise, PB actually chooses to save her friend instead of saving the remnant tech from falling into the lava. Like I say, this was a surprise, not because I thought PB was particularly malicious, but Kalinda has been trying to kill us for this entire part of the mission. And bearing in mind, usually when people try to kill you try to kill them, at least in this game, it's really surprising that PB then tries to save her life. The two of them obviously had some sort of relationship at some point, but given, like I say, that Kalinda has been trying to kill PB, I don't think PB needs to feel guilty about letting her die. You can actually shoot Kalinda if you want, and that frees up PB to go and save the tech, but then PB isn't too pleased with you afterwards. You escape on Kalinda's ship, but it's not quite over. Slightly later, PB talks to the group and thanks everyone for being nice to her pretty much. She's going to move out of her escape pod and actually live in a proper part of the ship. She requests some help to tidy up, and this scene is a little cheesy, but I actually liked it.
Okay.
About time you caught up, kid.
Yeah, you're one of us, whether you like it or not.
Well, great. So, my place is an utter mess. Who wants to help me clean it up?
Think I left the stove on.
I'm making ice.
It's an Angaran holiday.
Reports don't file themselves.
Helping Liam make ice.
But...
PB's story isn't exactly subtle. She's worried about commitment and makes that blatantly clear from the first moment you meet her. And she lives in an escape pod. Yeah, like I say, it's not exactly subtle. I definitely get why people don't like PB. I think in other games she would annoy me, but like I said, there's so many boring characters in here that PB is actually a welcome breath of fresh air. Jarl wants you to help out his brother and sister who have joined the Rokar against his advice. Again, there's a shitload of toing and froing between planets, but eventually we end up on Haval and find his siblings. Out of nowhere, his sister shoots his brother, although it's clear his brother's life is never in any real danger. You'll come up against the Rokar leader, and if you manage to keep your cool, you'll end up with the Rokar on your side as the group is effectively disbanded. Jarl isn't the most exciting of teammates in the series, but he played an important role in getting the Angara on our side early on, and I always felt like I owed him for that. Helping him in this mission felt natural enough. What pissed me the hell off was that the second I went back to the Tempest, Jarl invited me to join his family for a meal back on Haval, the planet I left just a few seconds ago. I've no idea why this had to wait until I was back on the ship, and I've no idea why I have to be on the ship to read my damn email. Anyway, you meet his mum and have a meal with his family, which was a decent ending to his loyalty mission.
How much he admires you.
Really?
He's my favorite. Smart, loyal, kind. A great shot. Writes poetry, sews.
Mother.
I'm late for a resistance meeting. Stay clear.
Your mother's in the Resistance?
Yes. And every child is her favorite.
Vetra's loyalty mission is next, and it's pretty bland. Vetra needs help to save her impetuous younger sister who's gotten herself in trouble on that asteroid we went to earlier. I've got to say, I found Vetra kind of boring, and this loyalty mission didn't do much for me. Vetra, Jarl and Cora are fairly serious and dull characters. Jarl just about gets away with it because he has this Angaran monk vibe going on that I quite liked. Cora's loyalty mission is significant, as we'll see in a minute, so her boring personality doesn't really matter much. Perhaps it's also because I did Vetra's mission just after Jarl's. I just rescued Jarl's brother and sister, and now I'm being tasked with rescuing another sibling. It's not really all that imaginative. Anyway, I save her sister and get to meet her, and everything's happily ever after. Cora's loyalty mission has more significance than any other because she has a lead on the missing Asari arc. Cora's ability to use biotic powers is so strong that back in the Milky Way she used to train with Asari, and she'll never let you forget it. Again, this is one of those things she mentions pretty much immediately, and it's hammered home a few times just in case you missed it. This mission was a bit of a mixed bag. You land on the Asari arc and meet the current Pathfinder. It's not who Cora was expecting, but the original Pathfinder died, and so the second in command, Sarissa, stepped up. We later find out that Sarissa left the original Pathfinder to die because, as far as she saw it, she had no choice between saving some data and saving the Pathfinder. Sarissa seemed to genuinely believe that the data they had on the Ket was more important than saving the Pathfinder. It's hard to say whether she made the right call, but Cora certainly doesn't agree. I don't mind a few shades of grey though. It's also interesting to note that Sarissa hasn't told the other Asari what happened because she doesn't want to be blamed for the Pathfinder's death. She wants to be a hero. There's some decent combat with the Ket in this mission. You're effectively fighting in open space, and I'm not really sure how realistic this is, but the sound effects are actually incredible, so it's worth suspending a bit of disbelief. What I didn't like about these battles is the way the Ket just appear out of nowhere. You see them spawn out of thin air sometimes, and it's incredibly sloppy.
Disconnecting the first cable now. Cat! Watch the device. We'll handle them.
But we need you, Vidaria.
I also suffered another one of those one-hit kills from the guys with the shields. There's a weird scene at the end where Cora and Sarissa put up a massive force field that deflects the Ket missiles. Cora is still pissed at Sarissa and thinks that Sarissa is putting her status as a hero over the truth. I guess I can see where she's coming from, but I chose to keep Sarissa's actions a secret. This loyalty mission is clearly worth doing for the Asari arc that's involved. It didn't change my opinion on Cora though. She's yet another member of the crew that fits firmly into a category that I can only label as boring. There's a small epilogue to her story where you go back down to Eos to start a garden. Now, I'm probably just being a heartless bastard, but nothing about this had any emotional impact on me. I never developed much of a connection to Cora, so this just washed right over me, and it didn't help that I had to do this scene twice because the game hard crashed right after I finished it the first time. I did Drax's mission next because I knew that would provide a bit of light relief. I know I said I'm skipping most of the preamble before the story started, but it's worth checking out this incredible fight scene. Brilliant, isn't it? This loyalty mission is another one of those where you go to a planet and save someone. However, this had a bit more punch to it. The Krogan you need to save, Vaughn, is important, not just to Drac, but to the Krogan as a whole. He's a key to their future because of something in their head, but it sounds like he's going to help them reproduce. I'm not sure how. There's a big conspiracy story surrounding this whole thing involving a guy called Spender back on the Nexus. You do some digging and eventually find out where Vaughn is being kept prisoner. As I'd expect from Drac, there's some decent quad-related dialogue and the mission is much better paced than some of the others. There is also a better closer to it where you and Drac fight some thugs in a bar. Ryder does her best to ruin it with fucking awful dialogue and delivery, but Drac keeps the scene going. I must admit I've got a soft spot for Krogans in Mass Effect games and Drac maintains that run. Finally then there's Liam. I'm not going to lie, I hated this character from the moment he opened his mouth the first time, and I didn't change his mind when he kept sending me emails telling me which films I should watch and which books I should read. Liam further dug himself into the shit by giving confidential data to an Angara who has now disappeared. He's worried that pirates could get hold of the information and use it against them. The thing is, this mission has got some of the best level design in the game. Now I admit that's not saying a lot, but still, it's true. There are a couple of great visual gags at the beginning and then the gravity starts shifting and you have to work your way through the level with walking on walls and ceilings and stuff like that.
Find Rand and fast. This way. Not that way. Start there. Let's go. I jumped us here blind. We don't know where anyone is or how anything works. And now we're fighting some asshole who wants everyone chained. It's like hitting Andromeda all over again.
Shield the bed.
Don't make this about the whole initiative. We're here to help and... Why am I the one defending your plan?
I don't know.
I will not be ignored anymore.
See? Total asshole.
I didn't really care about the story here, to be honest. The situation seems to sort itself out, so that's all good. Now before finishing off the main quest, let's just sum up these loyalty missions quickly. Drac and PB are vaguely entertaining characters and I'm fine spending more time with them. Jarl, Vetra, Cora and Liam are all various degrees of boring, but Jarl gets a pass from me, possibly because he's a new race and that gives him a bit of a boost. The summaries of the stories I gave above were pretty short, so it's worth emphasising that there's a lot of build up to them. Unfortunately that build up tends to just be moving between planets for 30 seconds on each one. Still, the loyalty missions have clearly had more thought put into them than any of the other side missions, and I'd argue most of the main missions as well. Unfortunately there's not enough variety. 3 of the stories are about rescuing people, which gets pretty repetitive. So they're good missions, but they're not mind-blowing. What would be really nice is if these missions somehow, I don't know, played into the ending like they did in Mass Effect 2? Yet no such luck. The loyalty missions used to serve a purpose. I mean, they were called loyalty missions for a reason. You needed the loyalty of your teammates for the final battle. Not so here. One of the missions plays in ever so slightly in the final quest, but it's a really minor point. One final thing I want to bring up before going back to the main story. I just want to emphasise how much of a disjointed mess this game is. When playing the game, you're encouraged to get 5 planets to 100% viability. You only need 40% viability to build an outpost, so this is just like a little extra thing to do on top. It doesn't really make any difference, and strangely you don't need to complete every task on the planet to achieve 100%. I actually never intended to go for 100% viability on the planets, but it's actually quite easy, and I did it on 3 of them without even trying. When I saw I was close, I went and completed the other 2 planets to get them to 100%. It was definitely before completing the story and before even most of the loyalty missions. They're supposed to be like a little closer to celebrate getting to 100% viability on all 5 planets. There's a short cutscene to celebrate getting the planets to 100% viability. Watch this short scene closely.
A team effort, surely.
There is one more item, Pathfinder. Opening channels to the Nexus, Meridian, Prodromos, Detaeon, Tevuni, New Tachanka, and Initiative allies. By unanimous vote, this world is to be renamed. Habitat 7 is now listed astronomically as Ryder 1. Your world, Pathfinder. Their future.
How nice. A planet is getting named after Ryder. That's pretty cool, right? Notice anything else weird?
Channels to the Nexus, Meridian, Prodromos, Detaeon, Tevuni, New Tachanka, and Initiative allies.
Yeah. The game references opening a channel to talk to the people on Meridian, the place we haven't found or been to yet. I've no idea how this slipped through. If I'd had to guess, I'd imagine it was originally much harder to get 100% on all the planets, and maybe it was even impossible to do before completing the story. There's one small thing that backs this up. There's a gold trophy for getting this 100% viability thing. That might not sound like a big deal, but there's only one other gold trophy in the game, and that's for completing it on Insanity difficulty. There's a big difference between completing the entire game on Insanity and just getting these 100% viability things. I strongly suspect that getting 100% viability on the other planets was originally much harder. Not necessarily on par with completing the game on Insanity difficulty, but a pretty big deal nonetheless. What probably happened then is that maybe playtesters said it was too hard to do, or more likely they said it was too boring because you had to complete too many mindless tasks or something like that. Even after you've got 100%, you can do things that add 2%. So you get 100% and then it gives you another 2% and it stays at 100%. So something has been fudged here somewhere along the lines. And yeah, my suspicion is that it was really difficult originally to get 100% and they changed it significantly. That meant you could now do it before the end of the game and they forgot to take this line out. The game spoils itself. What makes this particularly annoying is that so many other missions get put on hold for no reason. This is the one mission that actually should have been put on hold, but it wasn't. It's just unacceptable. Let's get this main story over and done with. Director Tam and the rest of the Nexus team refuse to support Ryder and don't understand the importance of Meridian. Ryder rebels and decides to go there anyway. This might be a big deal if we in any way feared the Nexus. I mean, I went 10+ hours without even going there, and to be honest I'd forgotten all about it. Is going against the will of the Nexus and Director Tam supposed to be significant? How does it ever play out? I mean, I guess she's technically disobeying orders here, but it doesn't feel like a big moment. The journey to Meridian quest is one long puzzle vault for the most part. When you finally get to the main control panel, you find out that Meridian is not about terraforming planets, it's actually about creating life. Specifically creating the Angara, who were made by another race called the Jardan. The Jardan created the Remnant to keep the planets habitable, although that does make you wonder why the Remnant shoot at everything on sight. I guess they're protecting the vaults. It still seems a bit aggressive though. Anyway, this system can create life, but it can also destroy it for what I'll just describe as video game reasons. The next reveal we get is that this place isn't actually Meridian, it's just a part of it. The team need to get to the central core, which is an artificial planet that looks a bit like, well, you know what that looks like.
Disengage Meridian from Command Core, which will remain here to draw fire. Meridian contains all the work of the Jardan. Nothing else matters. I will send it far. We can return one day. Continue the process of renewal.
You have a mini boss fight on the way out and then you make it back to your Tempest. In order to find Meridian, you need to go to a few random parts of the map and do some scanning. You didn't think you were going to get through the entire game without doing some planet scanning, did you? I mean, come on. You then end up going to another vault, which in the end gives you the location to Meridian. The Archon hacks into Sam, which leaves Ryder in a bad way. We already know that Sam is intimately connected to her, so when he shuts down, she dies as well. I guess that's the theory anyway. The Archon has control of Sam, and with that he can use Meridian to wipe out all life in the cluster. I guess he's given up on the idea of exaltation now. He also has the location of another Sam, which is the one connected to Scott on the Hyperion. I liked this next bit. The Ket attack the Hyperion and you get to control Scott briefly, or Sarah if you were playing as Scott in the first place. There's a unique sense of urgency about this because Sarah is going to die if Scott can't reboot the system to reactivate Sam in Sarah. Scott succeeds, but he's captured by the Ket shortly after. The Ket are after the Sam system that's attached to Scott. It's all a bit weird. I'm not entirely sure why the Archon takes control of Sam and Sarah, but then kind of needs Scott's Sam. I tried not to think about it too much, to be honest. Now everyone heads to Meridian. The Tempest can't land, so you're thrown into a linear driving section, which to be fair looks absolutely gorgeous. It's one of the best looking parts of the game. You don't get to enjoy the scenery long before you're in another vault. I should have known the game would end in one of these bland places, but I'd hoped for more. Naive, I know. You then get this scene where the captain of the Tempest gives a big emotional goodbye as she crashes the ship. She clearly thinks she's going to die, so she asks everyone else to go into the cryopods, which I guess she thinks might save them. This big goodbye speech doesn't work on many levels. First, we've barely spoken to her and frankly don't really give a shit about her. I mean, I remember her from that scene with Sarah's father right back at the beginning, but that was about it. The other problem is, she doesn't die anyway. Or at least she didn't die in my playthrough. I saved the Asari arc, so Sarissa is there to throw up a shield to stop the Tempest blowing up on impact. There's a lot of issues with this. So first, the biotic shield that Sarissa throws up is an absolute blink and you'll miss it moment. The shield doesn't even seem to be there when the ship hits the ground. And then you never even see Sarissa. You hear her over the comm and she says she's close enough to throw up a shield, but you should be able to see her. We've seen her biotic powers before. She helped Korra block the missiles earlier. This seems like a similar kind of feat to that, and I feel like she should have been pretty close by and therefore in view. I'm fairly certain this scene was added in really late just so that BioWare could pretend that player choice actually means something. This scene doesn't really flow or fit in with the rest of the game at all. Sarah keeps moving into the vault. The Archon has beaten her to the source of all the power. He needs Scott there because, well, I guess something Sam related? Yeah, I don't know. Of course the game needs Scott to be there because it then gives you more urgency and he's there to sort of cheer you on. Now you just defeat more of the same enemies you've been fighting for the entire game, plus the Archon in a weird snake-like form. Now this is a tough fight, but only due to the sheer quantity of enemies. You don't have to do anything new and there's no real trick to killing the main boss. He's actually quite easy. In fact, he's really easy. It's a weird tentacle thing that opens up and you shoot it when it's open. It's like the first boss in a Zelda game. It's the sheer quantity of enemies that are the problem. Now I don't know about you, but I was expecting to fight the Archon in some way. Instead he projects himself through this weird tentacle which you have to shoot at a bit while you go and activate more consoles. It's a pretty pathetic way to end the game. I guess we should just be thankful that we don't have to do a Sudoku puzzle while under fire. Again, I think it's impossible to overstate just how little imagination and enemy variety there is on offer in this game, and the boss fights make it more obvious than anywhere else. After defeating the Archon, it's all over. Meridian starts terraforming planets to make them livable. Except, haven't we already done that on quite a few of these planets? There's an attempt at a cool ending, but it's completely ruined when Ryder opens her mouth.
Look at all this data. The energy spikes from the biogenesis alone are mind-boggling. I know I can't compete with your first love, but...
Mass Effect Andromeda hasn't finished being shit yet. After the credits there is one of the worst sequel or DLC teasers I've ever seen. Seriously, what the fuck was that? Now I'm guessing this Ket is Primus, I think that's him. We met him earlier when he was speaking with the Archon, and there's a scene I didn't show you where you actually kind of come to an agreement with him. He actually helps you against the Archon briefly because he doesn't like what the Archon's doing. But that doesn't really fit because he helped you against the Archon, but now he's annoyed that you've beaten the Archon. So I'm really not following why he's got this angry face on here at the end. Plus, he's only about equal to the Archon, I think. I mean, he certainly didn't sound like he was his boss. So instead of getting like the ultimate big bad to worry about, we've just got kind of another person on level with the Archon. Like, I swear, the people writing this game just know nothing about basic storytelling. But wait, there's more. Ryder has to choose who should be an ambassador for the Nexus to help when dealing with the outposts in Angara. Now, I guess this choice might play out a little bit in a potential sequel, but that doesn't make it exciting. And then finally you have to go and talk to every single member of your crew. The game makes you go and talk to every single member of your crew because it knows full well that if you had a choice you wouldn't bother. I know in my case I'd probably talk to Suvi, like she's the one I hooked up with, and then maybe PB, Jarl and probably Drac. That's it, but you have to go and talk to all of them. The game is actually over now. I mean, you can go back to planets and keep shooting Ket as if none of the previous 45 hours happened, but do you really want to do that? I could sit here and rant into my microphone for hours about how much I hate this story, but anyone can do that. Unlike performance issues or combat or user interface, there's no real way I can support my arguments with evidence. I think the best thing I can do is to give you my own ideas for a story. The first thing I'll say is that in an ideal world, BioWare would have picked a canon ending to the trilogy and have this story take place after that one. It doesn't have to be the same crew, in fact it shouldn't be the same crew. Have this story take place 200 years later, 500, whatever. The approach taken in Andromeda is a cop-out. BioWare wants the benefit of the Mass Effect name, but it doesn't want to do the hard work and build on those previous games. It throws in a few references to get hardcore fans feeling all warm and tingly at times, but that's not enough. However, there's not much point in me coming up with a completely different story. I want to throw out some ideas of how I would improve this story. Now obviously storytelling is one of the most subjective parts of a game, so I don't expect everyone to agree. I'm just doing this because, given how much I've criticised other people during this video, it's only right that I put my own suggestions forward. Let's keep living in a dream world for a bit though. We know that 4 arcs travelled to Andromeda, but 3 of them barely played any part in proceedings. The result of this is that we only really get to see 3 main races in the game: humans, Ket and Angara. Obviously we have Asari, Turians, Salarians, Krogans etc, but only really like 1 of each as they form part of Ryder's crew. There's not a ton of Asari, for example. The Andromeda Galaxy somehow manages to feel less diverse than the Milky Way. I mean, good work there, BioWare. So here's my idea. You've got 4 different arcs making the trip. First of all, let's make that 5 and give the Krogans an arc as well. Now why not let the player choose which race they want to play as? So depending on which one you choose, you would get a different story at the beginning. You'll always end up becoming the Pathfinder, but the first hour or so will happen differently each time. You'd also be treated differently depending on which race you picked, and this would give a decent reason for having varied combat skills. If you really want to use biotics, then you'd be best off playing as an Asari. Best of all, with the Krogan involved, we could play as a tank like Drak. Now that might sound like a lot of additional work. Perhaps it's far-fetched to think a developer would go to this sort of effort to give the player an interesting origin story and a choice in how they play the game. I definitely admit it would take extra work, but it's not unprecedented. There's this other game that I played a few years ago, or I think it was about 8 years ago now. It's called Dragon Age Origins, that was the one. Now, fair enough, that was done by a different really talented team of developers, and we can't expect everyone to reach that level. Yeah. Okay, so BioWare developed Dragon Age Origins and they're developing Mass Effect Andromeda. Okay, let's imagine that budgetary restraints mean that my idea is a no-go. You can still improve the core story in Andromeda. Let's fix the start of the game first, because it's a complete mess. First of all, you could speed up the intro a bit. So how about instead of the slow scene where you wake up on the ship and meet your father, you just skip to the bit where you're falling onto Habitat 7. There's plenty of time to fill in the details later. That's not what I would do though. Mass Effect Andromeda is quite a long game. You're talking about at least 45-50 hours for most people, and some people will spend more time than that. I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea to have a bit of a slow start. Not if that slow start gives you the time to develop characters and build relationships. The problem with Andromeda's start is that it's slow in the sense that it's boring, not that it's slow in the sense that it's building relationships. Take Horizon Zero Dawn for example. That game started slow as hell. You were picking up rocks at the beginning, but it let you get to know Rost and understand the world. So how about this? The game starts with Alec Ryder talking to the Benefactor. The speech is full of mysterious stuff like, we have to move forward with Project Andromeda, the Milky Way is doomed, and all this kind of thing. You could even just take the stuff we've already seen in the memories, that would probably work. The key thing is that we set up the Andromeda initiative as being important as opposed to just being a random trip to another galaxy. This scene would be quite short. After that we cut to Sarah and Scott and they're getting ready for what looks like a test. It's kind of an obstacle course, like a practical exam. This is obviously the tutorial. You're going to learn some platforming, shooting, biotics and that kind of thing. And importantly, you'll actually get to learn how to use the biotics properly because the game does not teach you to do that. There's a point to this obstacle course though. The obstacle course idea probably sounds a bit silly, but I think it works. Like I say, if Horizon can get away with having you pick up rocks, I think Andromeda can get away with an obstacle course. And it's part of a session for a military group. It is like a test of some kind. Sarah and Scott are competitive and talk as if one of them is going to win. And as the player, that's kind of the assumption, right? You think, oh, I'm bound to win. And as the player, you do beat your sibling. It'll be a close run thing, but it'll be done in such a way that you win. Or at least you think you've won. The actual winner will be Cora. Alec Ryder, who's in charge, will go over and congratulate Cora and be really strict with the rest of the team. Now, at no point will you really think that Alec is Sarah and Scott's father. The relationship just wouldn't appear that way. The siblings keep messing around and maybe they agree they're going to go for a drink or something. And then you see Alec get a message, either old school way with a messenger coming over, or he looks at his email or something. Alec then looks at Sarah and Scott glumly and walks off. They know something's up, so they follow him to their home where their mother Ellen is about to pass away. This is where we'll have a nice scene where Ellen basically says goodbye to her kids and then she dies. What we're not going to see at this stage is that Ellen and Alec actually already agreed that she would go into cryosleep. She wants to say goodbye to her kids and effectively fake her death or whatever, because if something goes wrong and she never gets woken up, she wants to at least have said goodbye. Then the next scene will be Scott and Sarah getting ready for Andromeda. So the ship is nearly ready, and it can be actually in space or on a planet or whatever, but it's nearly ready to go, but the launch is maybe a week away or something. A large group of rebels then attack the base where Andromeda is. They found out that humanity is doomed, and they want on the Andromeda initiative too, and who can blame them? Eventually you'll have no choice but to kill the rebels who are attacking you just to defend your ship. This is obviously another combat tutorial, but it's less scripted than the obstacle course. The attackers keep coming, so the decision is made to launch the Ark with mainly humans on early. The human Ark was the first to leave, and therefore it's the first to arrive. Let's forget all that Nexus crap for the time being, and you can probably forget all about the Scourge as well. Did you notice me mention it that much in the story? It's this weird thing that's always there and yet simultaneously not that important. The humans have to fend for themselves at first. I'd say that ideally the player is only a member of the crew initially, not the Pathfinder. This doesn't need to be boring. You can still be the one in charge of individual missions, just ultimately you'll report to your father. This isn't really that different to reporting to Director Tan on the Nexus. Just because you're not the main person in charge doesn't mean the game isn't fun. In the first act you come across a hostile alien species and get into a few firefights with them while doing your Pathfinder thing and trying to find somewhere to live. Now this species will actually be the Angara, not the Ket. There's lots of reasons to excuse fighting at first. I mean, you don't speak the same language, you're effectively invading their planet. There's a lot of reasons why you'd end up fighting. So initially you have a lot of skirmishes with the Angara. Then at the end of this first act, so let's say about a quarter of the way through the game, or maybe a third, everything just goes to shit. A bigger, badder enemy appears and they're really aggressive and just sort of kill everyone on sight basically. So you have to fight alongside the Angara this time. I think at one point around this stage in the story, your character is going to be given a decision to make, and you will choose to either be kind of gung-ho and reckless or really calm and collected. If you act reckless, then your father has to save you, and in the process he dies. You then have to deal with that guilt for the rest of the game, and people will maybe hate you or make snide comments in your direction or be a little bit cold with you because they worshipped Alec to a certain extent. If you take the approach of acting calm, then it's actually your sibling who ends up fucking up and Alec still dies. You will be worshipped as the new Pathfinder, but your sibling will be despondent and hated by many of the crew. This decision means something, but it won't change the game so much that it makes it impossible to develop. I don't think it has to mean there's two completely branching stories, it's just a difference in dialogue. And I would kind of compare this to like Paragon Shep or Renegade Shep from the original trilogy. Depending on whether you went with the sort of good or bad approach, obviously people talk to you differently. I didn't really like making a 50-50 choice between being good or evil, but making a 50-50 choice in the heat of the moment and then having to deal with the consequences of that, I think could be quite cool. And I want it to be kind of that the gung-ho and reckless option is actually the most appealing. So I'd say that like I want 2/3 of players to go with a route that means they end up being responsible for their father's death. I don't think much needs to change about how you become the Pathfinder. There can be a similar scene where your dad dies and he passes control to you, but let's make it a bit clearer that he's only doing this because Cora is not close enough. Maybe Sam needs to be passed to someone immediately or he loses power. Your character is now the Pathfinder and there's a new threat in the galaxy. There's more I would change though. First of all, let's not have everyone worship Ryder just because of her Pathfinder title. I mean, there's nothing really special about a Pathfinder. I mean, for one thing, Pathfinder should really refer to the team, not one person. The team goes down to planets to explore, and that's really it. Obviously, Sam ends up being the key element, and that doesn't become clear till later on. So let's talk about this new group of aliens. I'll refer to the new group as the Ket because that's basically the role they're going to play. This time I want the Ket to have a story and a reason for being. They need this cluster because their own world or worlds are no longer livable. They've destroyed their own planets, perhaps something like climate change or whatever, and they're now looking for somewhere else to live. And just for good measure, let's throw in another issue as well, that thing about them not being able to reproduce. That would explain why they end up converting the Angara into Ket. Even though they initially didn't get on, humans end up making a truce with the Angara and agree to sort of come together for the common cause to fight the Ket. A bit like in the current game, one of your teammates is going to be an Angara, but let's have him actually working against you. He's kind of a spy. His brother, sister, father, mother, whatever, died fighting humans before the truce, and so he wants to get revenge. I'd have it that if you form a bond with him, then he won't go through with his revenge. Maybe he'll confess, or maybe he just won't go through with it and he'll keep it quiet. If you don't form a bond with him in time, he's actually going to maybe blow up an important part of the ship, or do something that makes your life harder in the end fight. Other elements of the story can stay the same. I'm fine with this whole thing about the Jardan creating the Angara in the first place, although I'd suggest one further element of friction between humans and Angarans. I'm going to say that the Jardan created a safe zone around the Helios cluster that the Ket couldn't penetrate. When humans clumsily burst onto the scene, they actually broke this protection, and therefore they're actually the reason the Ket are here in the first place. This makes the arrival of the Ket much less of a coincidence, and I really hate coincidences in stories. In my opinion, that's a decent enough premise to move the story forward, although of course I would say that. The bad guys have an actual purpose now, and in their heads they might even think they're doing the right thing because this is the only way to preserve their species. There's also plenty of conflict between the Angara and the humans. I love the idea that one of your teammates might betray you. Imagine getting into a romantic relationship with one of your teammates and then finding out they were actually going to blow up the ship. And maybe they still do go through with it, maybe they were just pretending to be interested in you. There's a lot of potential there. This is one of the ways Andromeda fails. There's no conflict in the game, and even where there is conflict, it's quickly brushed away. So Cora at the beginning is kind of annoyed that Ryder gets promoted above her, but she really quickly gets over it. And then you've got the fact that the Angara have already met humans, so you don't even get to experience being new to the galaxy, you just already get on. Now there's hints that not all Angara are like humans, but it's just background noise and it's not really enough to make a difference to the story. If you want, you can keep the terraforming stuff in there, but let's make it a bit more dynamic. I really do think there's more of a developed base building aspect to the game at one point, so we could put that in. Maybe after you've put an outpost down on a planet, you have to put military there to defend it, and then you can research it, and if you leave it alone for too long, then the Ket will attack. And let's make 100% viability mean something. Having a planet 100% viable means it's clear of bad guys and has actually got protection around it. Once you've got it to 100%, you can leave it alone. So that's your reward. You don't have to go back there to protect it. I also think the bad guy, and let's just call him the Archon again, needs more depth. There's a couple of ways to do this. I mean, we know he's not in charge of all the Ket, so there could be a few scenes where we see him get torn out by his boss. This might make him feel a little bit more sympathetic, the whole he's only doing this because he's following orders thing maybe. Or maybe let's go for something else. We know this Ket have got the problem with not being able to reproduce, and maybe the Archon is a prince or someone who's in line to the throne, and he wants his chance to come to power, but he's also worried about his line ending because of this failure to reproduce, and somehow the activities in the Helios cluster can help him with that. Anything that might make us sympathise with him a bit more and might give him his own story that he's working towards, other than just, I'm either going to transform everyone in the Helios cluster to Ket or I'm going to kill them all. Because. Now none of this story will work if the dialogue is flat. I mean, I can't do much about that in this video, I can't write the entire game. There's a pretty good chance this section just sounds profoundly arrogant, like I think I know what I'm doing and no one else does. I genuinely think that the ideas I've discussed here are better than what is in the game. Now it could be that ideas like this were mentioned in Bioware and they're on the cutting room floor for development reasons. However, the fact is the story they've got in the game is not that good, and I think the one I've suggested is a better way to go about it. However, Mass Effect Andromeda has more problems than just its story. Separate from the story and the animations, the dialogue and its delivery is another huge problem with Andromeda. The dialogue is always functional. It moves the story forward and imparts information to the player. It just never does it in an interesting way. Ryder is the most obvious culprit because she's the one you'll spend most time with. She's supposed to be the leader. Now, to be fair, she's supposed to be a new leader, but she talks like how 16-year-olds think adults talk. Or is it how adults think 16-year-olds talk? I'm not sure. There are weird pop culture references thrown in, and I even heard Ryder threaten to turn this car around if my teammates wouldn't stop arguing in the back seat.
The windows are fogging up on the inside. Isn't there some sort of de-icer?
I swear I will turn this car around.
Humour is more subjective than any other type of writing, however that doesn't excuse an entire game full of this crap. I think the writers were trying to capture a Firefly feel with witty banter between all the crew, but they don't succeed. Worst of all, the conversations between Ryder and the Archon are benign and just devoid of any suspense or tension. The game is already struggling for narrative, so when your antagonist and protagonist can't get any decent dialogue going, you're really going to have a problem. I should also touch on the delivery of the dialogue. Now, I'm not experienced enough with voice acting to know for sure where the problem lies, but there is definitely a problem. I'm tempted to lay the blame at the flaw of the director. Ryder sounds almost identical regardless of the gravity or levity of the situation. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the voice actor was just shoved in a booth and told to read off the script without any direction. When you do notice a change in her delivery, it's often in the wrong place. You can actually tell sometimes that sentences have been pieced together from different parts where dialogue is being rearranged. It's quite jarring. Your teammates are just as guilty with this bland dialogue. Nearly without exception, you get a character's complete backstory the first time you meet them. I mean, isn't that what loyalty missions are supposed to be for? Someone has read a book on how to write a story but has never actually practiced doing it. I mean, the obvious advice is show, not tell. That should be easy to do in a video game where you're encouraged to go on side missions with your crew. That's when we should learn about the characters, not through massive exposition dumps when you first meet them. Mass Effect games are pretty famous for their romance options, but the less said about the flirting in this game the better. I decided to have Ryder flirt with Suvi because she's Scottish and a redhead. This was a no-brainer for me. Unfortunately, this had some of the worst dialogue in the game. It does lead to one pretty funny moment though. There's this dialogue.
No, I mean, I think you're cute and I like seeing you up here. Oh my goodness, Ryder. Also, the accent. The accent is, I mean, it's not the only thing, but, okay.
And then Callow voices what we were all thinking.
Kill me now.
Ryder, thank you. And so you know, the feeling's mutual. Yes! I mean, time to pathfind. Serious business. Saving everyone.
I even wonder sometimes if this line from Callow is like an editor's note that accidentally slipped into the game, because if I was reading this script I could completely imagine writing that in the margin. Other dialogue is annoying because of how much you hear it again and again and again. On a couple of planets there are extreme temperatures that you can't survive in forever, so Sam warns you when you're changing between safe conditions and dangerous conditions. That might sound harmless enough, but in practice, my god, this gets annoying.
Heat levels increasing. I'm reading a normal temperature range, Pathfinder.
Just think, every time you move from a shadow to the sunlight, he says it, and he often interrupts himself when he's doing it. You also get dialogue loops happen in fights quite often as well. And I don't just mean you hear the same dialogue occasionally, I mean it literally just keeps looping.
Scavengers. Might be trouble.
The trail leads right to them.
Scavengers. Might be trouble.
The trail leads right to them.
Scavengers. Might be trouble.
The trail leads right to them.
I often found in conversations that characters would talk all over each other, and sometimes there seemed to be 3 different conversations going on at the same time.
I hear the researchers attacked an entire kept base
To study it. So you're just
Someone
giving
around
up
here
on you.
probably knows what that ice
He
is
was your
for.
best friend.
Don't think that ice is for
I'm
slushies.
saying we need to think
Bad
about
weather
this.
for it.
Get in touch with
Environmental
Watson and
temperatures
form a
are within
plan.
acceptable limits.
They could be dead. Stars. It's you.
BioWare used to have good writers. They also used to make role-playing games where you made choices that impacted the story. Mass Effect 2 had an incredible ending that changed significantly depending on which loyalty missions you completed and other choices that you made. Andromeda does not do that. Over my 50 hours with the game, I made 2 choices of note that impacted the ending, and I'd argue they were basically just cosmetic changes. The choices I made in Mass Effect 2 dictated who lived and who died from people on my team. In Andromeda, the main choice you make just decides who helps you out at the end. That's the one where you choose between saving the Solarian Pathfinder or the Krogan Scouts. It's a negligible difference, and I think in the heat of battle you might not even notice it, to be quite honest. Drac has a few words with you afterwards if you don't save the Scouts, but he quickly forgets about it. The other choice you make is whether or not you save the Asari Ark, and that's the bit where Sarissa kind of uses her biotic powers to save the captain of the Tempest, who I can't even remember the name of because we've barely interacted with her. If you do want to see some good writing in the game, then I recommend checking out the emails. You might think that random emails from the crew would be a dumping ground for the worst of the game's writing, however, in a really weird way, it's actually some of the best. On the off chance you actually do go and play the game after watching this video, I won't spoil them all, but I will say that a highlight for me was Drac getting caught out by a Nigerian prince style email scam. Of course, BioWare isn't stupid. It's a developer full of intelligent, hard-working people. They know there's a lack of decision making in the game here. I expect they just didn't want to deal with implementing these choices in the other 2 games of what is presumably a planned trilogy. Just look at all the grief they got the last time they tried to end a trilogy. They're probably trying to keep choices to a minimum so that they can actually have an ending that makes some sense. That doesn't change the fact that it's really unsatisfying to go from a game where you used to be able to make lots of decisions to one where you can't. You don't even get to choose what type of person your character is. The game pretends you have a choice over what Ryder says next, but much like Fallout 4, all you're really doing is choosing how you say the exact same thing. You're basically choosing a tone of voice to use. The Paragon Renegade system from the previous games is gone, and that's no loss in my opinion. When presented with a choice of being a good person or a bad person, I always end up playing the good person. In games anyway, I mean in real life I'm an arsehole, but in games I always go for the good person role, because it's a fantasy. But this choice is too black and white. In Andromeda, Ryder will respond in a particular manner, with you being able to choose between passionate, logical, casual and professional. This sounded like a great idea at first. Depending on the circumstances, I would answer in all 4 ways throughout the game, and I liked knowing that I wouldn't put any of my character relationships beyond repair just because I disagreed with them once in conversation. Unfortunately, of course, the other side to that coin is that none of your decisions make a blind bit of difference. People used to replay the Mass Effect games, and not just to screw different aliens. There was a real tangible difference between Paragon Shep and Renegade Shep. As I said, I think it's a good idea to get rid of this binary choice system they used to use, but I didn't intend for that to be replaced with no choice at all. You do get to make shocking decisions a couple of times, but they were shocking in a bad way. They came so out of the blue compared to the rest of the game and compared to the character that Ryder is, that I just didn't really believe them. The first choice I kind of hinted at earlier, where I accidentally shot PB's former lover in cold blood. An R2 prompter popped up on the screen and you don't get any time to think, so I just kind of hit it accidentally and shot her. Now this is definitely not something my Ryder, or anyone's Ryder, would have done, because that is not how she acts through the game. She is not the Renegade Shep kind of thing. There's no Renegade option. As the player, you shouldn't have even had the option to have murdered this woman in cold blood. Something similar happened at the end of the game. I had these 2 dialogue options. Now, I'll admit, I knew there was a sniper nearby covering me, but I didn't expect this to happen when the woman I was talking to did absolutely nothing to suggest she was a danger.
Allah, I'm sorry.
I thought the sniper was just for an emergency, and that's not what this seemed to be. This choice shouldn't have been in a game where you don't get to develop your character in a way that they're really cold-blooded. These choices don't fit with the character at all, and I suspect they were either added late to give people a feeling that they could do bad things as Ryder, or they were supposed to be part of the game early and then at some point BioWare decided they didn't want to have like a good and a bad Ryder in there because it was too much work. I can't avoid talking about the graphics and performance issues forever. I'm going to try to limit the amount of time I spend on this section because most of you will already know that Andromeda has its performance problems and graphical hiccups. This stuff also tends to get fixed with patches, so I don't want to date this video too much. That said, I can't ignore them when they affect the gameplay this much, and they really do affect the gameplay. I played on PS4 and from what I've heard the problems aren't as bad on PC, so take that into account if you're still considering buying this game. Let's start with frame rate dips, because that is about as objective as anything in this video. I experienced regular frame rate drops while in large scale combat and travelling around planets in the Nomad. That's not unheard of course, but I still think it's unacceptable on a $60 game with this kind of budget. Obviously frame rate drops in combat are a problem, but even when you're not in combat it's distracting. When moving around planets, these Ket ships will often appear and obviously Ket will drop down from them, but they kind of move at about 5 frames a second. It's really odd. It reminds me of playing Halo back in the original Xbox days for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why, but that's the image I got in my head. I've already mentioned some of the more glaring errors throughout this video, but just for reinforcement, here is some footage of the Nomad randomly stopping while moving around the planet. This happened a lot. There's also some major issues with collision detection and general interaction with the environment. I've seen animals get stuck in rocks and so many floating enemies that I'd actually start checking the skies during combat just in case. The pop-in is also so bad that it's actively distracting. In my Horizon Zero Dawn video, I mentioned that there's a horizontal line running across the screen, and if you look really closely you can see additional texture detail being added as Aloy moves. This is actually so subtle that you can't see it on the YouTube video. Andromeda's pop-in isn't quite so subtle. The effect is actually so bad that I have to wonder whether the game would have been better off just removing the vast majority of these environmental effects altogether. They're incredibly distracting, and okay, if they weren't there the planets would have looked a little bland, but I think that's better than actually having all this stuff appear as you approach it. And then there are the performance problems with the conversations. It's bad enough that the dialogue and story is dreadful, but the conversations are handled appallingly. Not only do the characters look like shit, of course, they're so badly positioned for in-game conversations that it becomes really infuriating. You absolutely have to turn on subtitles because you won't always be able to hear your teammates talking. If you start a conversation with someone and a teammate is really far away, they might join in the conversation, but their voice will be from, back wherever they are, and you can barely hear them. Oh, and by the way, you can also get attacked and even killed during conversations.
And resilience. We use their beacon. They want a target, let's give them one. On our terms.
Site 2 is still powered. You could broadcast from the old comm array.
This happened more than once to me. It's a regular thing, not just a one-off. Honestly, I could make an entire video with the performance issues in this game, but plenty of people have already done that, and it feels like flogging a dead horse at this point. A dead horse I paid $60 for, mind you. I'm not going to dwell on the animations here. There's been plenty on display in this video, you can see for yourself just how bad they are. Make your mind up on how big a problem it is for you. I don't think the animations are the biggest problem in the game. They might not even be in the top 10. I mean, I don't think they're very good, but there's just so many other bigger problems. I'll make one final point on the game's performance. In addition to dealing with all the crap I've talked about, I also had to endure 3 hard crashes that lost me nearly an hour of game time thanks to Andromeda's awful save system. Other people have had far worse experiences than me, but I had my fair share. The bugs I mentioned above happen many times. I think the best way I can explain it is to tell you how I write notes while I'm playing these games. When I see something in the footage that really stands out, I make a little note with a timestamp and put an exclamation point at the end to remind myself that this probably needs to actually appear in the video footage. That can be a good thing or a bad thing obviously, but often it does tend to be glitches, it's just the nature of the thing. After a while I had so many lines in my notebook with these exclamation points that I had to step it up a notch. I started putting 3 exclamation points at the end of a really bad glitch. I don't know why I skipped 2, but maybe 3 for dramatic effect. Anyway, 3 exclamation points wasn't enough. Things kept getting worse, so I resorted to underlining the really bad glitches. Finally, and I swear I'm not kidding, I actually had to then go and add an asterisk to the beginning of lines just for one final measure to really pick out the worst things. This game is a complete mess and EA should be embarrassed to have released it in this condition. I've been ragging on this game for quite some time now, so let's talk about one of the few things the game actually does right, or at least not badly: the combat. Superficially at least, the combat is a lot of fun, especially I'd say for the first part of the game. The gunplay provides a challenge, although it's far from insurmountable, and there's a real thrill to hovering in the air and then raining hell down from above. Your standard melee attack is a pain in the arse to use while on the ground, not helped by camera issues, but in the air it turns into this ground pound that's as effective as it looks. There are some camera issues, especially with that melee combat thing, which is for some reason mapped to the triangle button, however it's largely decent. The melee thing is actually kind of strange. I started using a sword for melee combat. When you press triangle though to institute a kill, the character kind of moves away from the enemy and then moves towards them. That gives us a nice little kill animation, but it also looks like all control is taken away from the character for just that little bit too long. It's not like when you press R3 for a quick melee kill. I'm not sure I'd say it's a real strong negative, but it did mean I didn't use the melee attack as much as I wanted to, just because I didn't like that way I got taken out of combat. The hitboxes are incredibly generous. Any initial desire you might have to be accurate quickly gets thrown out the window when you realise you can just aim in the general direction of enemies and fire. While the combat is undoubtedly the best part of the game, I don't really have a lot to say about it. Don't take that to mean it isn't good, it is, it's just not all that special. I'm going to be really lazy here and just compare it to a couple of other games. The combat on offer in Andromeda is a lot like that in The Division, with its bullet sponge enemies and general lack of punch to the weapons. There are also some Destiny vibes thrown in to account for the sci-fi powers on offer. That's the easiest way I can think to describe it. The Division plus Destiny minus the loot. After levelling up a few times, you'll be able to equip tech or biotic based skills. You can also improve your survivability and adaptability with weapons, but I'd say the skills are much more fun. I went with Incinerate, Concussive Shock and Shockwave for the most part, however there's plenty to choose from. If you want, you can pull enemies in and then push them away if you want to feel like a Jedi, or you can just go for a Flamethrower and Freeze combination. You'll do the most damage by using a skill that first primes enemies and then detonates them. The game does a woeful job of explaining this, so much so that you might be forgiven for thinking it's an advanced technique that you only need to use on the higher difficulty levels. That's definitely not the case. I can't for the life of me understand why the game doesn't give you a decent tutorial on this system. I'd love to know what new players to the series thought about this and when they noticed you could use the skills in this way. There is some text in the skill description, but I don't think it's well explained at all, and I reckon a lot of people will miss it. Now, I said earlier that combat is good only for the first half of the game. That's because it quickly wears thin and problem areas start rearing their badly animated heads. The automatic cover system worked well for me at first, and when it didn't, I didn't really suffer all that much. I might have just been unlucky with this, but later on in the game the cover system started becoming a huge issue for me, and then I died a few times because of it. The automatic cover system does work well nearly all of the time, so it really just comes down to how unlucky do you get those times it doesn't work. I think this is more my personal issue, but I prefer hitting a button to go into cover. It feels more satisfying and it's nice to know that I'm officially being protected. I played most of the game on medium difficulty, however I also played on hard and easy at times. The change in difficulty obviously affects the damage dealt and received, but it doesn't affect the AI. The Ket and human outlaws are dumb as hell, so much so that I suspected it might be a glitch. It's kind of hard to tell because when the enemies get stuck floating in the air or stuck in the environment, they just tend to stand there and not shoot at you unless you are directly in front of them. I'm pretty sure that is part of the fact that they are glitched and they're stuck in the environment or they're floating in the air. But then the enemies will also do that when they're not stuck somewhere, so it's really hard to tell what's a glitch and what is just poor AI. I think now is a good time to talk about the skill tree and the class system because this impacts combat a lot and I think it could be improved. You pick from one of 6 classes, however you can change between them whenever you want. The classes give you tiny boosts to different skill sets, so some classes are better with guns, others with biotics, others with tech, or even a mixture of all 3. Now first up, I'd rather have a class system that was based on my earlier idea about being able to play as different alien races, but I guess I have to accept that that ship has sailed. This current class system seems pointless. The difference is so minimal that you might as well just not bother. As it stands, you can use your skill points and split them between the 3 different types of skills however you like. By doing this, you're already developing your character into a type of class, it's just not labelled as such. Why make the player choose a label to stick on their character? Just let them build the type of character they want to be. My issues with these skill trees go a bit deeper. You need to level up every single one of your skills. Obviously you don't want to be using a level 1 Incinerate near the end of the game. The problem with this is that it somewhat discourages you from acquiring new skills because you have to level them up first before being able to use them effectively. Now I should point out that you can reallocate your skills at any point. I mean, this feels kind of weird in a game where we're supposed to be building a character to roleplay as, and it's also implemented poorly. You have to pay an ever increasing amount of credits to do it. At first it's not really enough to put you off, but that amount does start increasing. You also have to reallocate all your points in one go, so if you just want to shift skill points from say Incinerate to Shockwave, you have to redo your entire character. If you want, you can save different profiles, however I didn't notice that until very late in my game and I think it's really poorly explained. A better approach would be to have the character just allocate their points to either the categories of combat, biotics or tech. You wouldn't have to give all the skills to players straight away. Certain skills could be restricted so that maybe for example you can only use the freeze ability when you've reached level 10 in tech. However, the strength of your skills is always determined by your overall level in each of those 3 main areas. BioWare has drastically overcomplicated the skill tree and it's had a detrimental effect on the game by discouraging players from regularly switching up their skills. It's a shame because the skills are a lot of fun and I wanted to mess around with all of them. BioWare kinda knew they made a bit of a mess of that, hence you can save different profiles and hence you can redo your skill points whenever you want. But I think they implemented this change quite late in the day and it would have been better to have just redesigned the skills from the ground up. Another reason combat became boring in the latter half of the game isn't directly related to combat per se, but it's close enough. There is a distinct lack of enemy variety in Andromeda. The Ket are humanoid enough that you don't really notice a difference at distance, and when you're not fighting Ket, you're fighting humans. There are some beasts thrown in there, but they're woefully lacking in variety as well. Despite the incredible difference in weather and terrain between the planets, the enemies rarely change in any substantive way. There are fiends, which I just refer to as space gorillas for the most part. There's a couple of insects and there's some dog-like creatures. They don't seem to particularly fit their environment at all, and other than maybe changing colour occasionally, they seem to just be repeated on all the different planets. Eventually firing at bullet sponge enemies becomes boring. This is just an estimate, but I'd say that about a third of the way through the game you will have faced nearly every enemy type there is to see. Now sure, a few new remnant machines pop up and you'll face armoured Ket and different types of shields on the same Ket, but none of them feel different. I rarely change my tactics depending on the enemy. The only exception of note is those really annoying Ket with the shields. You need to keep your distance against them, and a sniper rifle is pretty useful. Those are the ones that do the one-hit kills. The combat in Mass Effect Andromeda has enough potential depth that I want to recommend you play the game on the hardest difficulty you can foreseeably handle. I want to tell you to do that, but I can't. You see, the game has a dreadful save system, so if you die you're potentially going to lose a lot of time. You can't save at all during priority missions, which is just ridiculous. Sometimes shit happens and you need to stop playing. The situation is even more annoying outside of priority missions. When you're exploring planets, you'll probably pick up side quests and start doing random tasks that get thrown at you. However, the game doesn't save at all. Right near the beginning, when I landed on Eos, I happened to do some exploring, completed a few side quests, I scanned a ton of new stuff and earned loads of research points. A large fiend then escaped from a cage and I ended up in a tough battle and died, which is fine. However, I lost 30 minutes of game time because there hadn't been a save since I landed on the planet. Now that might not be so bad if there weren't so many bugs. For example, I had to reload a save once when the Nomad got stuck on the asteroid with no way to get back to the surface. I deliberately killed myself, but it just kept landing me back in the same spot. I also somehow respawned inside the Nomad while precariously balanced on a platform in the vault. This stuff is really weird, but save your game and save it often. I want to be clear, the combat isn't actually bad. I mean, in fact, I'd say there's a really strong foundation here. The issues I've listed above aren't really the fault of the combat. They're the fault of the weird skill system and the lack of enemy variety that is indicative of the lack of care spent on the final product. I'd wager that the combat is the best part of the game for most people, myself included. I just wish the same care had been placed in other parts of the game because those issues bleed into the combat and detract from the overall experience, in my opinion. It's also worth pointing out that some things from the previous games have actually been removed. You used to be able to select where your teammates went, and you can still do that, but you also used to tell them which powers to use and when, but you can't do any of that anymore. Now I must admit I was not one for micromanaging my teammates anyway, but it seems weird that they've taken that out of the game. Okay, enough of all that excess positivity and praise. Let's get back to the bullshit. Navigation might sound like an odd subject to go into detail about, however it's possible this is the part of the game that annoyed me the most. The times I came closest to throwing my controller out of the window, followed by the PS4 and then myself, were when I was trying to navigate my way around the fucking dreadful maps in this game. I've already mentioned the map on Haval, but this navigation issue is a problem on every single map in the game. Dragon Age Inquisition had similar issues and it blows my mind that this wasn't fixed. Navigation can fail on even the most basic level when there is so little information on the map to plan your route with. It's okay knowing that you need to go east, but how do you do that when there's a huge unpassable mountain in your way? BioWare loves to make you take one specific route to get places, so you're going to come across a lot of dead ends and impassable things. At first I was prepared to give BioWare the benefit of the doubt. After all, maybe they just see this as the most realistic way to build terrain on the planet. But if so, why not give us a bloody waypoint to follow so that we don't have to go north, then east, then south, for example? Anyway, I don't think BioWare's going for realism. I think you're forced to take these set routes around planets because BioWare is hiding loading zones. I mean, that's definitely the case on Kadara, judging by the constant freezes I got as I moved around. Look, I get it, these are big planets and to be fair there aren't massive load screens where you get when you first load up. I don't mind the odd loading zone, however I do mind driving around for hours trying to figure out how the bloody hell I'm supposed to get round a mountain. Even more annoying is when a navigation point is on a mountain or is it under the mountain. I've had quests where the marker has been on the peak of a mountain only to find out that I actually needed to find a cave entrance somewhere else entirely and then drive through the cave to get under the mountain to the quest. Why not just point me to the cave entrance in the first place and then once I'm in the cave sort of navigate me through that? This sort of crap is unforgivable in 2017. To make it even worse, I did actually get a couple of quests where you do in fact need to go to a point on the top of a mountain that any reasonable person would assume was impossible to reach. Now this point just so happens to be above a cave that I remember from a previous mission, so if you remember there's a cave under there, then you'd naturally assume that's where you need to go. You'd be wrong. By the way, as an aside, when you're driving around you might be tempted to run over care, outlaws or even just bugs. Don't bother. The Nomad is surprisingly useless at doing any damage to enemies it hits, even if you run them over. Now if this part of the review were proportional to the pain and suffering it caused me, it would take up 50% of the video at least, but I've probably made my point. It's another example of Andromeda suffering compared to Horizon Zero Dawn, which happened to be the last game I played. Horizon nails the navigation around its world, so Andromeda is left feeling distinctly last generation. While on the topic of navigation, I want to hammer home a few other points that I've only hinted at so far. Andromeda has a lovely map of the Helios cluster, but moving around it is an absolute bitch. If you want to move from one planet to another, you'll first need to travel to that star system, which has a load screen attached to it. You then select the planet and get another load screen. There's even this weird feature where the game zooms in on a planet and then kind of zooms out again. I guess someone spent a lot of time on this and no one had the balls to say no, perhaps we shouldn't put this in the game. These load screens are more than enough to put me off moving around planets for planet scanning purposes, although I'll be honest, I probably wasn't going to do that anyway. Now I think these are going to get patched out according to the latest BioWare notes, but I cannot understand why it was in there to begin with. How did no one say that this was a bad idea? They've even managed to take a step back from previous games because you used to have the Reapers chasing you around while you were doing planet scanning, but now it's just nothing. Interplanetary travel is at its worst when you want to go back to the Nexus. It works exactly the same way as other planets, but it desperately needs a quicker option. Why bother with this screen, for example? Can't the game just take you back to the Nexus without needing to click specifically on the landing bay? I mean, there's nowhere else for me to go here. Why not just put me in the damn landing bay? This is probably the reason I never went back to the Nexus. It was just such a damn exercise. Travelling between planets wouldn't be so bad if you didn't have to do it so often. I've mentioned this already, but it really does bear repeating. So many of the quests require you to go down to a planet for a very brief time, then back to your ship to take off, and then to another planet, then back to your ship and repeat ad nauseum. And this isn't just insignificant side quests either, you have to do this in priority missions and loyalty missions. In fact, loyalty missions are the worst offenders. PB's was dreadful. Again, this is one of those things that is so flagrantly bad it probably deserves an entire 15-minute rant, but I just don't know what else to say. It's awful quest design, that's all there is to it. Let's talk about the UI for a bit. Hear me out. Like navigation, I wouldn't usually dedicate an entire section of the video to such a dry topic, but holy shit, the UI here is on another level. I want this on video for posterity because reading about it just isn't enough. I'm also going to touch on all the different currencies at play in Andromeda because that's part of the problem with the UI. There's more currencies in Andromeda than there is in the top 10 video games on the App Store. It's just ridiculous. I've already covered the UI around the quest log and the skill tree, so this bit will focus on weapons and armour. But before I go into detail on that, I'm going to list out all the different types of currency and XP you can earn in the game. Now obviously there's the basic XP for levelling up your character. Your teammates also level up with you, by the way, even if you don't take them out into the field. There's also credits, of course. Now that's enough in my opinion, but apparently not for BioWare. You can use your credits to buy weapons and armour, however the best gear needs to be developed. Well actually first it needs to be researched. As you progress through the game you'll find blueprints for weapons, armour and augments, and you can then allocate research points to them. You get research points by scanning stuff, so you do have to do that unfortunately. There isn't just one category of research points though. No, that would be far too fucking easy, wouldn't it? You have to collect 3 different types of research points. If you want to develop Milky Way weapons, you need Milky Way research points. Likewise, Helios points for Helios gear and Remnant points for Remnant gear. Once you've researched the gear, you'll need to develop it with minerals, and there are a lot of different types of minerals. Stepping away from the gear for a minute, as you complete tasks on planets you'll earn Andromeda points, which are another form of XP basically. As you level up with these points, you'll gain the ability to open additional cryopods. Remember how big a deal that was at the beginning of the game? Yeah, now you just do it via a computer and no one ever mentions it again. This is the part where I'd be worried that Ryder might accidentally open the pod with her mum in it, by the way, but yeah, it's never discussed. The rewards for opening these cryopods, which you have to go back to the ship to collect, are so pathetic that you'd never notice if they weren't there. As I've mentioned, I'm convinced this whole cryopod was part of a bigger game earlier in development. In its current form, there's simply no point to it. So we have credits and 3 types of research points. There's 2 different XP systems and a crap ton of materials to collect. What else? Well, I'm glad you asked. There's also strike teams that have their own XP bars and can be sent out on missions. These strike teams gradually level up and successful missions grant a small amount of additional credits. You'll also earn mission points, however you can only use the mission points to hire more strike teams, which in turn allows you to earn more mission points. Again, it's utterly pointless. It's filler of the lowest possible value. Even worse, you need to be online to send out your strike teams, and connection to EA servers is finicky at best. BioWare doesn't even give you any story to go with these strike missions like it did in Dragon Age Inquisition. It's another step back, although frankly it's just not one I can muster the energy to be angry about. I'm saving that anger for the UI. Look at this fucking mess. I'll start with the research page. Everything is split into 3 different types of gear, so good luck comparing weapons and armour before deciding which one to research. The developers also thought players would care more about the lore behind a gun than its statistics. Let's say you found an outfit you like and you want the full helmet, chest, legs and arms set for it. You'll need to go into each section to see how many research points you'll need for each level and then add up the numbers yourself to figure out how high you can go with your research. I ended up with a level 10 chest but only level 7 for the others because I ran out of points. That might sound like my fault, but hear me out. The gear initially only went up to level 5. I had enough for everything I wanted and so that was fine, but after I hit level 5 the game suddenly showed me levels 6 to 10. And why not show me that before? In addition to keeping an eye on your research points, you'll need to look at the amount of minerals that you need for each piece of gear. That's fine if you're just going to build one thing at a time, but if you want a set then you're in trouble, and again it's just more maths you have to do in your head. The best approach to take here is to probably take one set of research points, say Milky Way, and allocate them all to a certain type of armour, and then maybe use your remnant ones for a good gun and then your Helios ones for a good augment or something like that. Once you've researched the gear, then you can develop it by going into a different menu. Here there's a list of gear you have the required minerals for in order of level. If you're short of minerals, then you need to go digging through more sub-menus to figure out what you need and where you can find it. You can find minerals on the planets or even buy them in shops sometimes, however vendors are so rare that it's not worth bothering with. I ended up choosing my gear based on whether or not I already had the required minerals. I got a pretty decent set, but I wouldn't say I got the exact best thing I probably could have done. It's just so cumbersome, it's just really not worth the hassle. I assume all these options were designed to provide depth, but that's not what we end up with. There's a hell of a lot of customization options, but it's not depth, it's just noise. It's options for the sake of there being options. The time and money spent developing these systems, especially that online one, would have been far better dumped into things that actually matter. You know, story, gameplay, world building, that kind of stuff. Most of the reviews I've read for Andromeda say that the most disappointing thing about the game is the story, and they usually take a dig at the performance issues as well. I'd agree with that sentiment. I mean, obviously I find the story incredibly disappointing and the dialogue is dreadful. I've also highlighted performance issues that plagued my entire experience from beginning to end. However, if I had to pick one problem with Andromeda, it would be the world building around the Andromeda galaxy itself. So the galaxy building if you prefer. As I've already mentioned, I don't think BioWare should have taken the game to a new galaxy, but if that's what it's going to do, then it needs to at least make the most of the opportunity to be inventive. Do something new. All rules are out the window, the possibilities are endless, it's science fiction. What do we get? The Ket, who are almost indistinguishable from the Protheans and countless other random space enemies that I've fought over the years, and the Angara, another bipedal species who don't add much to the experience. Is that it? The Angara are paper thin and I don't feel like I know anything about them. At times they appear to be a basic culture who are incapable of doing anything to defend themselves against the onslaught of Ket. However, they seem to have developed space travel and clearly have the means to defend themselves. But what's unique about them? Every race we met in the original trilogy had unique characteristics and history beyond just looking different. The Asari are excellent with biotic weapons obviously. I mean the Krogan have a massive backstory. We know that they became so powerful that they destroyed their own planet by infighting and they needed the help of the Solarians to develop again. The Krogans then became a threat and so the Turians injected the females which led to the genophage. And that's a ridiculously abridged version, I'm leaving a lot out but I think it makes the point. What do we know about the Angara? They were created by the Jardan and are now being kidnapped by the Ket. There are a couple of splinter groups and that's about it. Now obviously the other races had an entire trilogy for their histories to be fleshed out, but I'm fairly certain we already know the vast majority of what there is to know about the Angara. The missed potential here is infuriating. I'm not even asking BioWare to come up with anything that's particularly original. There is nothing wrong with being heavily inspired by other media, but it's best you don't copy your own previous material if you want to keep people interested. Instead of replicating the Citadel by having the Nexus, why not have a cool planet like Coruscant from Star Wars? That might take some work to squeeze it in narratively, but the Nexus story is already a mess. I'd use the Coruscant planet as the Angaran political centre. Maybe the Angara give the humans a small section of it as part of a treaty agreement or something. They are all working together after all, so it's not a huge leap of logic. Taking another cue from Star Wars, Andromeda definitely needs more variety in its intelligent life forms. Why not have aliens that don't walk upright on 2 feet? Have a species that communicates via signals that humans can't understand. Have a species that is vastly more intelligent than humans and who we actually see. Let's have some real multi-layered conflict between all the different species like we did with the Genophage situation. Andromeda is barren of excitement and conflict, and that's a huge problem in this game. In addition to the lack of intelligent species, there's also a huge dearth of cool animals and other creatures. That probably seems like a minor complaint, but I don't think it is. Any semblance of immersion is destroyed when you see reskinned versions of the same creatures on ice planets, desert planets, tropical planets, etc. Each planet has a creature that feels like it could be native to that particular planet, but then all those creatures are replicated on each other planet. I know the Jardan populated this galaxy, so there is technically a lore reason for animals to be repeated. However, are we really supposed to believe that the Jardan created about 5 different creatures and then just fucking copied and pasted them all over the place? The animals even attack in the same way. BioWare must have been worried that players would try and stay at range when fighting these creatures because they all have this weird acid spit attack, which looks horrendous. Mass Effect Andromeda takes place in an entirely new galaxy. BioWare could have done anything they wanted. The first 3 main planets are cool enough. Eos is a dry, desert-like planet, Haval is tropical, and Vold is snow and ice. But then Eladon is another desert, and Kadara isn't too far off, it's just got grass textures that pop in when you're on top of them. Why not have a smaller area like a destroyed city? Perhaps the Angara used to live somewhere else before Arya, but the Ket destroyed it. Ryder needs to head there to recover information. Anything to get the game to feel more different. I also can't get past the lack of care paid to the story surrounding the Nexus. That crap about the rebellion does not explain why humans are littered all around the planets and are getting on just fine. I'm sure I killed more humans than were ever on the Nexus to begin with. Also, how the fuck did Outlaws get access to all these damn mechs? Everything to do with the Nexus annoyed me. The people on board, the pain in the arse it is to get there, the way they pretend that settling on planets is crucially important because rationing is running out. Everything. Let's also discuss the Scourge briefly. You probably noticed I didn't talk about it much. Well, that's because there's not much to say. It's used as a plot device right at the beginning to give a reason for the Hyperion arc crashing and for why planets are no longer habitable. It rarely plays a part after that. We know it's synthetic, so someone put it there. This feels a bit ridiculous given its size, but whatever. It's obviously nothing to do with the Ket. The Scourge appeared 400 years ago, but the Ket only invaded 80 years ago. It wouldn't have been the Jardan since it goes against everything they're trying to accomplish. This means there's a third party out there who we know nothing about yet. This could be interesting, I suppose. But then why dump the Scourge here? I really hope if we do get an explanation, it goes beyond the Scourge kills planets and we like killing planets bad guy crap. The Mass Effect games never had the best combat. They survived on their characters, their story, their world, and the way you as the player interacted with all of that. Andromeda has decent combat, I'm not going to deny that, but it needs the rest as well. The characters have all the depth and witty dialogue of a Twitter troll, and the story is genuinely inferior to a lot of fan fiction. Even with those problems, and even with the performance issues, Andromeda could still have maintained a shred of credibility if the world had been fun to be a part of. I mean, that's how MMOs work. They don't tend to have great story missions and they rely a lot on fetch quests and things like that, but they have interesting worlds that you want to be in. If there had been 4 or 5 functioning planets with different cultures and inhabitants, then perhaps the game could have been entertaining on some level. It might not have been a great story-driven experience, but you could still lose yourself in the worlds and enjoy messing around. It wouldn't have been a classic game, but it would have been something. Instead, we get 5 planets, 3 of them varying degrees of desert really, and very little of note to do on them. Sure, there are plenty of tasks to complete, but they all have the personality and soul of procedurally generated content. They're only one tiny step up from the Radiant quests in Fallout 4. I love science fiction and I love exploring new worlds, but only when there is the potential to find something interesting. If I wanted to wander around barren landscapes, I'd play No Man's Sky. Ultimately, the Andromeda Galaxy offers up a whole load of nothing. If you completely disagree with me but have survived this long into the video, then thanks for hearing me out. I know it's genuinely tempting to stop listening when someone seems to hate on something you like and just goes on a big rant about it. It's not always pleasant, I know that myself. Trust me, I like some games that many people think are bad. Sometimes people just disagree and, it is what it is. I enjoyed the original trilogy, so I take no pleasure from hating this game. And I'm not trying to jump on a bandwagon either. Hell, sometimes I enjoy being contrarian. That's quite a lot of fun, and so far I've done 2 videos where I haven't really been contrarian at all. I mean, Horizon Zero Dawn was a critically acclaimed game and I really enjoyed it, and Mass Effect Andromeda is a fairly panned game depending on who you listen to, and I didn't like it. That's just genuinely where I'm coming from with these games. I mean, trust me, at some point I'm going to put out a video that disagrees with the common consensus. It just happens that I haven't done that in these 2 cases. It's just really depressing and predictable, unfortunately, to see the EA effect taking place again. I like to think I'm a realistic guy when it comes to business and making money. I've been trying to understand how EA profits from buying companies and then sort of forcing them to get worse and worse until they release a game that's really shit, doesn't sell, and then dump them. Presumably BioWare at some point is going to join other talented developers like Maxis and Bullfrog the second one of their games doesn't meet sales expectations. That might not be with Andromeda, maybe they get another chance to make one more, but EA will put even more pressure on them and they'll cut the budget and the game will be crap, and then bye BioWare. I do wonder if at some point someone high up at EA will turn to his colleague and say, do you think maybe we're the problem? Probably not. I don't want BioWare to fail, but I don't see where the Montreal branch can go after this failure, and yes, I do think it's a failure. I'm sure pre-orders were high enough that the game made its money back, however EA doesn't spend $40 million or whatever it was to make its money back. DLC is usually fairly profitable, however I can't imagine many people will be excited to continue this story. I'm going to take a risk and go on record as stating that we'll only see one piece of story DLC for Andromeda. There just isn't the excitement to warrant any more. Now obviously I could be wrong, but I think resources are stretched between fixing this mess of a game and producing post-release content. So what about a sequel? I cannot imagine a world in which we get an Andromeda 2. Disappointing games can of course be followed up by decent sequels. Watch Dogs 2 is a recent example. However, sales for that game were disappointing, presumably at least in part due to the mess of the first one. And that's with games that are not connected narratively. For a sequel to a game like Mass Effect Andromeda to succeed, the first game has to have a passionate fan base. Mass Effect 2 managed to win over people like myself who hadn't played the first game because fans of the first one were so enthusiastic about the journey, the world and the characters. The first Mass Effect game was flawed, but it wasn't ridiculed. Andromeda 2 won't be able to escape the controversy and general shitness of this game, and that's why I don't think it will ever happen. I haven't decided what the title of this video will be, but I'm fairly sure the word bad or terrible will be in it, something similar to that. I'm also fairly sure that people think I'm being dramatic or exaggerating. After all, Andromeda might be disappointing, but surely it isn't really bad. Well, in my opinion it is. I genuinely believe this is a bad game and not just a disappointing one that deserves a 6 or a 7 out of 10. I prefer a 5-star system and I'd probably give it 2 stars out of 5 on my scale. I'm sure this does sound a bit controversial. AAA games just don't get bad scores. A bad AAA game tends to get average scores. Even the bad ones tend to be packed with content, and Andromeda lasted me 50 hours. If you liked the game enough to do all the side quests or even replay it, you could easily hit triple figures. Games like this have big budgets and there's an expectation that they will always be good at worst. I mean, compare this to the movie industry for example. Movies always last somewhere between 90 minutes and 3 hours and they all cost the same to the consumer. It's much easier to compare the quality of a big budget movie to an indie one, when it just comes down to a simple analysis of which one did you find the most enjoyable to watch. I think games are much more complicated than that. How do you compare a 2-hour experience to Gone Home to a 50-hour game like this one? And how do you rate games like this when there's so much shovelware on Steam or mobiles and all that kind of stuff? If we took every game on Steam or mobile into account, then we'd never be able to score a major release less than 4 stars. It simply can't work like that in my opinion. Regardless of how you feel about movies like Batman vs Superman and Suicide Squad, I don't think many people would complain if a movie critic gave those movies 2 out of 5. I mean, hell, in my opinion, Suicide Squad deserves a 1 out of 5, it's dreadful. Those movies had huge budgets and they made a lot of money, but they're not good movies. I mean, I love Superman and I actually even enjoyed Man of Steel, but Batman v Superman is a really bad movie. You don't see movie reviews saying, yeah, it was disappointing and not what we expected, and then giving it 4 stars anyway. Okay, that's just another little rant to sort of preempt some of the comments I might get if anyone has actually managed to watch that far. Like I say, I'm not trying to be dramatic or anything, I genuinely don't like this game. As always, I don't mind if you do like it, or if you love it, or if you're somewhere in between. I'm more than happy to discuss my critique in the comments if you want to drop me a message. This is the end of the video now, so I'm sure you know what's coming. I'd appreciate it if you could hit the like or dislike button as appropriate, comment if you have anything to say, and share the video if you want more people to view it. I'm undecided on what my next video will be. The initial plan was to do a video on Prey, but that's not coming out for another couple of weeks, and that means there'd be at least 6 weeks between videos. I'm thinking of doing a shorter video on the new Planescape Torment Enhanced Edition that's come out to mix things up a bit. I don't have much experience with CRPGs, so that really would be a shorter video because I just can't go into that kind of depth. I don't have the knowledge of those systems. It would basically just be a noob playing a game and talking about it a bit. If you have any other ideas for games, then let me know. I'm still going to say that I can't do Persona 5. It would just require far too much time, and obviously I just do this in the evenings in my spare time. If I tried to do a video on Persona 5, it wouldn't be out until next year. So my final request is to just hit subscribe if you want to see whatever one of those videos does come next. Okay, thanks very much.